we definitely are looking for some feedback on this and the direction that we're going. I would consider it a very rough draft and a concept to consider moving forward with. I think the reason that it was dialed in to be K through 5 was we were trying to find some small chunk of this we could work on because it is a very large project. And the feedback I was hearing from a lot of teachers is that the requirements that are placed on K through 5 teachers are especially strenuous because they have to be thinking about all the standards all the time for every subject. Whereas someone in high school teaching a specific subject really only has to focus on those specific standards, and that maybe the most good could be done by working first on this K through 5 part. I mean, the goal of this was to really prioritize what's important in these earlier grades and simplify it and make it straightforward for our teachers. But additionally, I think this is possibly could involve into an important part of setting ourselves up for the next recalibration by really defining from a legislative perspective what an education should be and what we want to fund. I think there wasn't really time to do that with our recalibration, and perhaps this could be the start of a process for something we do going forward before the next one. And with that, Ms. Hytrek, would you please explain the bill?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Tanya Hytrek. I'm the Operations Administrator for the Legislative Service Office. I'm also the staff attorney for the various education committees. Before you, you have 27 LSO 126, and the title of the bill is Modification of the Required K-5 Educational Program. And as Chairman Andrew indicated, the working group met and gave us instructions. You have in your meeting materials something that looks like this that has a pyramid on it. And if you refer to slides 4 and 6, those are the drafting instructions that were provided for the content of the bill. As Chairman Andrews said, it modifies the educational requirements for grades K through 5. That's sort of the first policy decision, but additionally, it requires that those standards be administered at minimum 70% of the total instructional time. So these revised standards in schools will be required to be taught 70% of the instructional time. And with that, I'll go ahead and walk the bill. On page 2, those are really just conforming amendments to refer to later provisions in the bill. Page 3, lines 14 through 18. This is existing language regarding the ability or inability to prescribe curriculum, but because of the restructuring of this particular portion of the statute, I had to move it. You'll see that it's stricken on page 6, lines 14 through 16. So it's not a substantive change. It's just required organizationally. The substance of the bill starts on the bottom of page 3. This is where you'll find the revised standards for grades K through 2. It requires specific focus areas or skills to be included in those content and performance areas that are adopted by the state board. And then likewise, the same concept is contained on page 5 onto the top of page 6 for grades 3 through 5.
Senator Scott.
You want questions as you go through, or do you want to hear the whole presentation and then ask questions?
Maybe if we could get through the presentation and ask questions at the end. Thanks.
With that, page 6, line 12 through page 8, line 15, those are also conforming amendments. You'll note on page 6 that stricken language that I mentioned that's contained earlier in the bill. Moving on to page 7, again, that's conforming amendments onto the top of page 8. And then you'll note on the bottom of page 8, this is where the second policy decision comes in with the 70% instructional time requirement for those revised K-5 standards. Page 9 and 10, those are conforming amendments until you get to page 10, line 2. There's a repeal of 21.9.101G. That's the provision that requires in grades K through 2 that there is that world languages are taught. There's a provision in statute currently that requires for grades K through 2 that world languages are taught in those grades. It's been omitted. Moving on to section 3, this is, and actually 4 too as well. These are the implementation of the standards and sort of the behind the scenes work that needs to take place to have these put effective for school year 28 and 29. And with that, I would note that's a significant burden in that time frame. And I talked to Chairman Andrew about that, and he's aware that perhaps that might need to be delayed or staggered for this work to occur. On to page 11, lines 9 through 17. This is the effective date. It's a split effective date with the statute going into effect 28-29, but the ability for the State Department of Education and the State Board of Education and the districts, they're able to start work immediately. And with that, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I will stand for questions.
Thank you. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to have a number of questions. And I want to ask the questions of Tanya and get her response, but I'm also trying to prime the other witnesses that I've got questions in these areas that need answered. On the stuff, the material starts at the bottom, page 3, and goes over on to page 4. Let me ask the most general question first, and that is my perception of the problem that we've got is that they've formulated way too many standards with the result that nothing takes priority and nothing, it's difficult to enforce anything because there's so many standards that we're confused. It confuses the issue. And my question is, what does this section do that limits, solves that particular problem?
Sidetrack.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, I don't know that it addresses that specifically, but I do think that there's sort of two interrelated parts, and the intent, as Chairman Andrews stated, was to get at this very issue that you're talking about. And I think some of these provisions, like on page 4, lines 8 through 11 for mathematics, those are the standards within the mathematics and science that will be required. And by requiring those standards to be taught 70% of the time, I think you will be limiting the other standards that would be taught. So I think in that instance, that's sort of the policy goal. And I think as Chairman Andrews stated, sort of this is a work in progress in many of these areas, recognizing that, some of these items, like, for instance, humanities and social studies, includes world cultures and civics and government, and both of those in 21.9.101 are standalone standards. So some discussion about how that might work. And
Senator Scott, I also want to point you to, along with the bill draft, the handout that was, or the drafting instructions and this pyramid concept. If you look at the blue, this was submitted by Lindsay Adam, one of the teachers on our working group, and she worked on it as we went through this meeting and updated it. But really those bottom blue blocks of the pyramid are what we would focus on and assess, and really leave the rest of this pyramid up to local control and having them weave that in there how they saw fit. And that's, I think, this visual concept is particularly difficult to get into text. But that was sort of at that point in our working group, the concept we were moving forward with is really focusing on those things as the most important. Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we're going to be referring to this graphic, is there any way that we could get it on the screen for people to see while we talk about it? If it comes up again.
Yeah, I just need a moment to get it set up.
Thank you. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman. I've got a couple of questions here where I simply didn't understand some of the language. On page 4, line 5, they talk about print concepts, and that doesn't mean anything to me. I want to know what that means. On page 4, line 9, they talk about skip counting. And again, that's somewhat of a term of art. I don't know what it means. So those two questions, and then I have another question. Serious questions.
Ms. Heitrich.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman and Senator Scott. Once Ashley pulls up the pyramid document, you'll see that both of those items were within in the drafting instructions. My understanding of print concepts could include something like handwriting, basically, can you print? But I'm sure perhaps the Department of Education and the State Board would be able to explain that. I'm not an educator. And then as far as skip counting, again, I believe that's like 2, 4, 6, 8, that type of skill. But again, I would refer you to the experts in the room that know far more about teaching education than I do.
Yeah. Ms. Chairman,
Senator Scott.
I think some of these that are educational jargon, the educators understand them, but the rest of us may not. We may need to ask, do we need to put some definitions in the bill, Mr. Chairman? And Mr. Chairman, one other series of questions on this section for items 3, starting on page 4, line 13, item 4, starting on page 4, line 18, and item 5, starting page 4, line 22. Coming back to the issue of too many standards, what would happen if we forbade the establishment of standards by the state board in those particular areas at this grade? So they got to concentrate on the reading and the mathematics and say these other things, maybe we should say explicitly, these other things are reserved for the districts to judge how much is needed and where, and some kind of concept like that. And I want to throw that out as a question, see what the consequences of doing something like that would be.
Mr. Chairman,
Heitrich.
Senator Scott, apologies for stepping over you, Mr. Chairman. But I think that's a policy decision for the committee to make. The drafting instructions included those items as items that would be within the 70% instructional time. And so in the event that the committee wishes to omit those and only, focus on reading, writing, math, and whatever other subjects, that would be a policy decision and it would require revision of the bill.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott, I think as we discussed this in our third working group after the bill was drafted, I do think that's more of the intention of many of the people who helped with this is to go back and put the reading and math concepts within that 70%, and with the understanding that a lot of the other things such as social studies will be taught and layered in with, the concept of literacy. I mean, you need something to read. And so they can mix those in, but that the specifics of it, what's outside that 70%, I mean, yes, would be more left up to local control. I mean, as it's written, it's probably delegated to the Board of Education. I mean, all the standards still are. But if we wanted to specify that maybe we won't write standards on those things, I suppose we could do that. I think the concern then becomes equity and uniformity and whether we are, as a state, facilitating that. Senator Scott.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have the same set of questions with regard to the grades 3 to 5, except there, I think we need to gradually broaden the number of topics in which we have a standard. And frankly, I think the proposed science one on page 5, line 16 and following is actually very well done, and it would be useful. I would question the ones beyond that. In part, again, wonder if we shouldn't leave those to the district. And Mr. Chairman, the final question I would ask on this, that 70% figure, is that not two questions? To what how enforceable is something like that? How on earth would you enforce it? And second, if you could enforce it, would this not be micromanagement to the state level on a grand scale and likely to be counterproductive? It would seem to me that the way we get at this is to set the standards in the key areas. So you've got to get these things. And then the district has got considerable flexibility on how to handle the other things. And I really wonder if setting a percentage is the way to go here, as opposed to trying to reduce the standards to some manageable level and communicate that way.
Ms. Hytrek.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, there are mechanisms to enforce this type of requirement. It's a mandatory requirement, and the Department of Education and the State Board of Education do review, whether the school districts are teaching the content and performance standards. I think that is a component of school district accreditation. I'm sure the department can speak to that specifically, but I do think there are mechanisms to enforce it. Like I said, it is a portion of the school district accreditation that you teach the content and performance standards as required by law.
And Senator Scott, I don't necessarily disagree, and I don't think that the working group in general would disagree. I think that the 70% was one of the things that we talked about the most in the last meeting. And if that is the right number, and two, perhaps, I mean, that's one thing that gave teachers some concern, because they were worried that that would add a layer of complexity to what they're already doing. And but the necessity of it is that, you do need some way for the bill to mean something and enforce what we're trying to do with it. So I think that part of it definitely could be something we need to consider working on and changing how we're laying that out going forward. Senator Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up on the question about the 70%, how was that calculated?
I can answer, Senator Office. I think it was more of a placeholder number that we put in there just so we could present the mechanism and talk about what the best number should be.
And
Office.
on another question, I assume that there was general consensus around the interest of having a prioritization in K-5 for reading and mathematics and science, basically the core. That was a consensus interest. And this bill draft is an attempt at implementing that consensus interest. And is that an accurate description of how it proceeded? Okay, thank you.
further questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. We'll now take public testimony on the bill. Or no, I'm sorry, it's the Department of Education. All right. Go back to my script. All right. Public, is there any public testimony on this bill? I didn't think there would be none. Mr. Mullen.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tate Mullen, Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. I've got a few notes, a couple of questions. The 70% is definitely something that was flagged for us. Questions of how was this number arrived at? What is going to be the requirement to report in terms of teachers, districts, WDE's responsibility to track that? It's very unclear in here. I know that our teachers are concerned about another reporting requirement that, to your point, might take away from important instruction time. A couple other things that I want to raise. Wyoming Statute 213304 requires the State Board of Education to equip students for their role as a citizen and participant in the political system and to have the opportunity to compete both intellectually and economically in society. In fact, it is our task to make sure that students across the state of Wyoming are prepared for the jobs of today and tomorrow. So survey findings from the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, Pearson LLC, and Language Testing International show a rising demand for foreign language proficiency in the workplace. 9 out of 10 employers report relying on employees with language skills other than English. 1/3 of those employers have high dependency on such workers. This dependency is only expected to rise. And in fact, across these following sectors, the increased demand is projected to look something like this. Healthcare, a 64% increase in the demand for foreign language speakers. Trades, 59%. Education services, 57%. I highlight this because if we are preparing our students for the jobs of today and tomorrow, that world languages component is a vital piece of that, knowing what employers are looking for. We also know that with the science of learning, that languages are best learned in those younger years. It's harder for folks in their brains to learn languages as they develop. So we might run into efficiency problems. Obviously, there would be time later in their education career that they could take those language courses, but you may run into cost efficiencies and effectiveness issues when it comes to world languages if we remove that statute. There's also potentially an equity issue. So let's say that there's a district that decides, I want to keep our world languages at K-2, knowing that this is what is preparing our students for the jobs of today and tomorrow, and another district doesn't offer that. You've now created an equity issue across the state of Wyoming in terms of our requirement to provide a high quality education that prepares those students. The last piece that I really want to highlight here is the impact on our ability to be adaptive. A true recalibration is 3 components, right? We need to look at the standards, make adjustments so that we can prepare our students for the jobs of today and tomorrow. We're supposed to do that. We're supposed to figure out how that is implemented in Wyoming, and then we're supposed to cost that out. So when we do a recalibration, if we do a full recalibration instead of what has been referred to as recalibration light, we will now have to change statute every time we do one of those. We know how incredibly difficult that can be. And instead of this being a pragmatic decision, it will become a political decision. And that presents some significant problems in terms of a recalibration. Additionally, this circumvents what is a vital component in a recalibration process, those professional judgment panels. Parental input right? Like we want to make sure that parents have a voice at the table, teachers have a voice at the table. This is what we need to be doing in recalibration. And I'm just not so certain that requiring this in statute, I think to Senator Scott's point, this may cause more of a hindrance and slow this down and with all good intents understood. But with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The point is well taken about something like world languages not being included at this point, but it also exposes an issue that we have sometimes, is that when we ossify policy and what we're going to teach into law, that sometimes we fossilize some type of antiquated policy concerning the world languages. There are already instant AI translators. 15 years from now, imagine what those will be like. Learning multiple languages might become more of a hobby than a necessity in the workplace at that point. But the reason I bring that up is that when I see what we prioritize in statute, when we put it in stone like this, what are your thoughts about the exclusion of early CTE programs?
Mr. Mullen.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Kelly, I think whether it's the exclusion of CTE programs or a number of other pieces, this is the problem that putting this in statute presents, is that if we are really consistently every recalibration trying to define the basket of goods, making sure that it is up to date and current, it presents a significant problem in being able to change and address that, because you're going to have to do that in statute. And this is a great example. There are numerous other ones. And obviously what we know about education and what is required for a modern education is going to change over time. So this is a great highlight. And I think that it just highlights a broader problem with really focusing on putting these in statute.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I want to explore one thing that you said you weren't talking about, the foreign language requirement and potential there, and the issues of equity among school districts. This school district here has immersion programs because my understanding is the evidence is that the best time to teach a foreign language is in the early primary grades. That's when the brain is most likely to be receptive to it. And I can tell you from experience, it's harder to learn it as you get older. This district has an immersion program in, for example, Mandarin Chinese. A large district like this can support that, can find an instructor, though it's been difficult on occasion, Mr. Chairman. But and it has been very valuable for us to have a certain number of students, and frankly, it's valuable for the country to have some Americans that speak the Chinese language and converse in it. But I can't see how you could possibly offer that particular thing in most of the districts in this state. You couldn't find enough instructors for one thing. How does this, it's something only a large district can do. How does that fit into the equity issues and the Campbell decisions?
Mr. Mullen.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, it's a great question. And just a side note, the two most important languages that they're looking at in terms of being important in the workplace, number one is Spanish, and Chinese is right behind it in number two. So in terms of your question, obviously Natrona County has the ability to offer that immersive Mandarin Chinese program. That's going to be difficult in smaller districts, and absolutely understand and respect that. That's just a product of our state, the smaller communities, the rural nature of our state. What we need to really focus on, though, is in terms of that equity question, is something that is inequitable a product of a state-sponsored action, right? Like, is this something that the state was responsible for, or is this just a product of our rural desperate nature, right? So that's, does that make sense? That's.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's going down a sensible way. I want to explore it just a little further, Mr. Chairman, if I may. There are some advantages that small districts have that large districts, in terms of personal attention, in terms of everybody knowing everybody, so that the school administration has a better basis for dealing with individual students that a large district cannot duplicate simply because of the size. And yet the larger districts can offer more things than the smaller ones can. Do those things sort of balance, or does a strict reading of the Campbell decisions force us to try to say that they all ought to be equal? How do you deal with all that sort of thing? And maybe this is in part a legal question.
Mr. Mullen.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, it's an interesting question, and one I think that we could discuss ad nauseum and at length. I think at the end of the day, what we need to be doing is making sure that every district and every student, regardless of where they live, has access to the same high quality education. That might look a little different from district to district. Obviously, different districts pursue this in different ways, but we need to be doing our job to make sure that they have the access, ability to provide students those things. So that's a very generalized answer to your question, but I hope that.
Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, noting the concerns about what's being put into this legislation, I think you understand the interest that was provided, though, of trying to get to the point where the emphasis on reading, writing, and arithmetic and science, that sort of the core concepts are being emphasized in K through 5 in particular. Current statute already has a little bit of language that doesn't seem to work. That language right after the Common Core of Knowledge is for grades 1 through 8. Reading, writing, and mathematics shall be emphasized under the Common Core of Knowledge specified above. So the intent was there, but somehow that didn't get carried out. Do you have suggestions on how we can achieve the interest without going down this path, perhaps, of micromanagement, which I have the same concern. This legislation is pretty onerous as written, but the intent is pretty clearly, I think, respected by everyone that's involved. So what would an alternative be?
Mr. Mullen.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, it's a great question, and I think it provides the ability to highlight some of the great work that the State Board of Education, Wyoming Department of Education, and others are already undertaking in partnership with districts, teachers, in attempts to reduce the amount of standards, right? Like, this is work that we can do and have been doing without being overly prescriptive in statute. So I think figuring out a way to facilitate and continue that work is probably the best course. And that happens through conversations, continued interactions. I'm just not so certain, again, that a statutory approach is necessary. There's been a lot of great work that's already been transpiring. We can obviously build on top of that. We have those things already set in place. We have the people that are there to continue this work. That would be my suggestion.
Great, thank you.
Further questions? Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I wasn't on the working group, I think I volunteered not to be on any of them as best I could. But anyway, I really like what they came up with in terms of the pyramid. To me, it was kind of like a Maslow type thing. Everything was just more so in alignment with what's most important versus what may not be quite as important. I understand that the concerns with the 70-30, and that could be something that could certainly be worked. But I think as it is, even with the language issues, the world languages, if you look at the top of the pyramid where it talks about geography, world cultures, communities and society and government, I think you could actually incorporate that standard without, I mean, you could take it out and actually just say, well, it goes right here into the standard. That way it kind of takes away the equity issues, I can't talk this morning, that you mentioned, because I do think that we see in most of our rural schools issues with trying to have folks that have the background to be able to teach foreign languages at that level. It's hard enough to get them in the high school level sometimes. So what do you think about that in terms of just maybe taking away the percentages, but going with the pyramid as is, and then trying to insert maybe something like the world languages into that top part where it talks about geography and world cultures? Or is that too much to throw together?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, no pun intended, I'd like to mull that one over a little bit. I think my concerns are not so much with the content of like what we're looking at in terms of the standards and what that's not something that I'm really kind of focusing on aside from that world languages piece. I guess when it comes to that potential adjustment, I think there's always going to be room for, I guess, error, shall we say. And if what we have, obviously, again, right, rural districts' ability to recruit those teachers, to Senator Scott's point, that can teach an immersive Mandarin Chinese program is pretty diminished. But we all just completed some pretty good work in terms of providing some good raises for teachers that might be able to start drawing some folks in. So we have this tendency in education policy to want to move too quickly before we see if things are actually working. And it may be a moment for us to pause and say, let's see if this helps recruit some of those teachers to those more rural communities. That might be the case. And if it turns out it's not, we can tackle it then.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, one of the things we're trying to do, I think, with this bill is focus attention in particularly the early grades on the basic skills of reading and mathematics that are fundamental to the rest of education. What would happen if, in terms of trying to get that focus, instead of having the 70% figure, we simply said in some of these other things, no standards? For instance, if you look on page 4, lines 18 through 20, and I'm picking that because it's the simplest of those, perhaps. You say for humanities and social studies, the State Board of Education shall not set standards. But the districts shall determine the instruction that's appropriate in these areas. What if we did something like that, what would you and your organization feel about that?
Mr. Mullen.
Chairman Andrew, Senator Scott, I'm going to come back to this statutory approach, whether we are mandating something or prohibiting these standards. We're still running into the same issue. I guess one of the things that comes immediately to mind where we're saying they shall not create standards for humanities, social studies, geography, world cultures, civics, and government, and then we leave that to districts. Have we then, again, unintentionally, potentially created an equity issue, right? Given what some districts, and again, we're going to come back to that. Obviously, there are distinctions between what districts provide, but that is, again, a product of the nature of our state and not something that is mandated by this body. The moment the body starts mandating it and the state starts mandating it, that's where we run into the issues of you all can't create an equity issue, right? So whether it's unintentional or intentional, at least in my mind, that's a question that goes unanswered that might come up.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I want to follow up on that answer because I didn't quite understand where the speaker was coming from. It seems to me that if you mandate a standard and say, pick geography, for an example, one of the things that's cited here. You create an equity issue if districts are incapable of teaching to that standard. If you say that there won't be a standard in this area, we're going to concentrate on the reading and math standards, so there won't be a standard in this area. The district determines what it's going to teach in these areas, which are really sort of an exercise in getting the kids to learn use what they've learned, learning how to read. It seems to me that is less of you're creating an inequality. You're really asking the districts to pick something in this area and let them have discretion as to what they do. And I don't see how that creates equity problems.
Mr. Mullen.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott. So again, I'm going to come back to this discussion highlights one of the issues that we're talking about with the bill is once we do this through statute, things become very inflexible and very, we don't have the means to adapt or make any fixes very quickly. Once you put that into statute, we all know how hard it is to get that fixed and move those things. So that is, again, this overarching problem. In terms of that equity issue, when you're saying if the State Board of Education requires a standard for geography, that, as it currently is now, is done with a great deal of input and collaboration. This isn't something that they just pull out of a hat and go, this is the one that we're going to do. So when they have the ability to continue doing that work in that fashion, that means that that standard then, through that process, becomes applicable to every district. This is something that they can all meet because they've all had their input. They've had their conversations about what this is going to look like. When we prohibit, to your point, and we allow districts and the ability to say, well, this is what we're going to do. Again, the question arises, are we then still meeting the requirement to provide an education that meets the needs of students for the jobs of today and tomorrow? Is that going to be uniform across districts across the state? Does that prohibition and then letting districts just do what they want to do, does that potentially create an equity issue? All I'm saying is I think it's a question that would arise. I don't have the answer to that, but it's just something that sits in the back of my mind.
Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Morning.
Morning, Mr. Chair. My name's Jeff Jones. I'm the superintendent at Sheridan District 1. And my specific comment is related to page 6 under Roman numeral 5 for humanities, social studies, and computer science standards addressing history, geography, civics, government, world cultures, keyboarding, and cursive writing. I'd like to specifically speak to cursive writing. As you consider a mandate for cursive writing, I believe we need to separate the proven science of handwriting from policy questions of cursive. Proponents of cursive frequently cite Dr. Jane Yank's research, chair of the American Handwriting Analysis Foundation. She writes, findings from repeated studies at universities in the US, Europe, Australia, Japan, and China over the past 50 years confirm that those who are well practiced in handwriting accomplish reading, writing, memory, and comprehension tasks more quickly and deeply than those who type on keyboards, tap, or use point and click devices. I completely agree. Students need to write by hand and dramatically reduce screen time. There are real cognitive and educational benefits to putting a pencil in a student's hand rather than having the student do everything on screen. But notice what the research compares: handwriting to keyboarding, tapping, and digital devices. It does not compare cursive writing to print handwriting. That distinction matters. The research does not establish a clear educational advantage for cursive over manuscript writing. The evidence frequently being used to justify cursive writing is actually strong evidence for handwriting itself. In other words, the science supports the use of a pencil. It doesn't mandate the loop or style of writing. Cursive may have value, and local districts should certainly be free to teach it. But educational value and a statewide mandate are two different standards. Before the state mandates a specific instructional practice, evidence should demonstrate that that practice being mandated, not simply in the broader category it belongs to, provides a clear educational advantage. We should also remember that instructional time is finite. Every new state mandate determines not only what teachers must teach, but what they have less time to teach. I understand the concern behind this proposal. Our students live in an increasingly digital world, and many of us, including me, believe they spend too much time on screens. But we should not attempt to solve a problem by mandating one particular form of handwriting when a simpler solution is available. Let's protect handwriting. Let's put pencils in students' hands. Let's encourage our local school districts to limit screen time via the Wyoming Department of Education, not a legislative mandate. And let's keep the font a local Wyoming school district decision. Thank you. I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's correct. Those studies show handwriting, the brain-to-hand connection is what's important, not the type of handwriting at that point. And I concur that the state should not necessarily be mandating this to the districts. But I am curious, what is your opinion on the ability of students to be able to sign their own names, read the Declaration of Independence? Why wouldn't we push cursive?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Kelly, I think those are two separate questions. I think mandating cursive writing and being able to sign your name or read a historical document are comparing as apples to oranges in terms of the expectations of a teacher. Most documents that I sign digitally. But if you needed me to sign my name, I could do that without learning the entire cursive language day after day as mandated by the state.
Representative Kelly.
So you don't see the value in learning cursive? Because I have adult children now who are not taught it, and that's my fault. I can't blame the schools who print their names. They can't sign them in cursive, and I'm teaching them as young adults now how to write their name. But you don't see the value in learning cursive.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Kelly, that's actually not what I said. I said that I don't think it should be mandated by the state. I think I said in my statement that local school districts, if they choose to do that, should have that opportunity to do that.
Thank you. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I have some sympathy with the point of view that we should mandate a specific way of doing things in this particular area. But what about some of the other ones that are listed there? If the state board sets a standard on geography, is that then the state dictating how we're going to teach geography to everybody? Or is that best left to the districts who may say, well, teaching geography, we'll teach American geography as opposed to everything else, or we'll teach economic geography where you say, why are cities located where they are? What was the economic reason? that they were located where they were. There's a number of different ways of doing it.
Mhm.
And if you have a standard, does that then limit what the district can teach? Because there's so many standards, they have to spend all the time teaching standards.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, I think the point that you're making is a good point in that we can't teach everything there is to be taught. At some point, there's a limit to the standards. And if you choose the basket of goods, whatever is in that basket, you're going to be eliminating other things that aren't in the basket. And so my point is, if we're going to mandate cursive, what is the reason we're mandating cursive? Is it to put a pencil in the hand of students so that they can benefit from the brain benefits, as Representative Kelly said? If that's the case, there's not strong evidence that cursive writing is any better than print writing. I would hope that we're not mandating cursive writing to limit screen time, because that's what most of the great research around cursive writing points to.
Senator Scott. Oh. Okay, follow up.
I have a follow, but let's go first.
Okay, Representative Strzok.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I guess my only question is, we have kids that cannot read cursive at all. There's a real problem in our nation right now. I know when I was going to school, that was part of 5th grade. You left printing, and everything you wrote and everything you did was in cursive. So it's not like it would be something extra per se. It's just you matured out of printing and we're told to write everything in cursive. What do we do about these children that can't? It's almost like a foreign language to them. They can't even read it. I have a daughter-in-law that I handed her some. She goes, "Oh, I can't read cursive." Well, explain that and explain how we've lost that and what are we going to do about that?
Mr. Jones.
Mr. Chairman, the responsibility, I believe, is whether you mandate it or not. I'm proposing that leave it up to the local school district if they want to teach cursive. It's as simple as that.
Co-Chairwoman Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to piggyback on this, I understand your concerns. What if that was taken out of that section on page 6, the cursive writing, and it's already kind of addressed over on page 5 in the reading and language arts standards, because it says we're addressing handwriting there. Would that, if we just took it out of that section, left the fact that we're going to leave addressing handwriting, do you think that would still give you some levity, some flexibility in the districts? If you wanted to teach cursive, you could. If you didn't, you didn't, or not?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, that's exactly what the standards say right now. It doesn't mandate cursive. It mandates writing and all of the frameworks of writing in terms of making arguments, punctuation, all of the things that we've learned throughout the years. I'm not against cursive writing. I just don't think it needs to be mandated from the state legislature.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Brennan has her hand up.
Senator Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm finding this conversation on handwriting and print versus cursive interesting and intriguing. And I think there is 2 different things, but I would actually be curious on some of that research that has been talked about that it doesn't really say anything, because my understanding is that research actually shows that the cursive handwriting works differently, that it helps with brain development and stuff like that. So whether the legislature mandates this or not, I do think that what is important is that schools and districts and teachers take a good hard look at what some of the neuroscience and that kind of research says about cursive handwriting. And because I do find it concerning, and I have talked to occupational therapists that say kids are really having a hard time that don't know cursive because there are certain things in the brain that it really helps with developmental and cognitive abilities. So I just want to put that out there that I would like to see research that suggests that it doesn't, because the research that I've looked at would suggest otherwise.
Mr. Chairman, can I add a comment?
Mr. Jones.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Brennan, this morning I read a couple hours worth of peer-reviewed research from the last 10 years, some from journals of occupational therapy that contradict exactly the point that was just made. The research that points to the neurological benefits of cursive writing, the vast majority of that research is comparing it to keyboarding, not print writing. And I'd be happy to provide that research.
Thank you. Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Superintendent Jones, thank you for being here. I have a little bit broader question and kind of a concern. So I've been in the legislature 4 years and on the education committee for 4 years. And we have been pretty direct about the reduction of standards. And our state Board of Education has done a good job of going back and reviewing and making it where teachers can teach again in the classroom. So I'm trying to weigh that against here, which opens the door for more standards to be developed. And kind of like we're chasing our tail to a certain degree. That's what my concern is. Maybe we're not, but I just wonder about that. And again, I think there's some good things in here. We haven't really gone through to see are every one of these important, but I guess what I'm looking for you to give me your thoughts on is what is your view about how this, based on your experience, will affect what the state school board would be required to do in order to create more standards in these grade levels than currently exist? Talk about that.
Mr. Jones.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, that was a point that I had thought about, just didn't make a comment about, but it's exactly something that I'm concerned about as well. It goes back to Senator Scott's point. I mean, there are a lot of things that we want students to be competent in, but at some point we have to draw the line and say, we can only do so much. And so I agree. The movement has been a reduction in standards. Let's do fewer things, but do them more thoroughly and better. I appreciate that. I think the product over the coming years is going to be better because of that. So when I did my research this morning, I sincerely looked for every possible research study I could find that made it a positive gain to have cursive writing over hand print writing, because that's really the difference. It's easy to find the evidence of cursive writing over keyboarding and iPads, but over standard print writing, because if we do that, if we see that just significant research, that it is so much better for the students' brains, cursive over standard handwriting. And it's that staggering that it should be done, then let's do it. I think those are the conversations that you have. Like, what are we unwilling to let go of? Or what are we willing to add to the plate at the same time that we're cutting, because the research is so demanding of it? I don't see that with cursive writing.
Follow up.
Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for that. I was even looking more broadly beyond the issue you raised about handwriting versus cursive. I do understand your point about that. But more broadly, with all that's here in this bill, how does it affect, and again, not to say that the goal is to not add any standards, but how does it affect this sort of circle we go around with regard to state standards and how they affect the teacher in the classroom and doing her job? So more broadly, even beyond the issue of that particular part. Do you have any comments on that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, So this is my 34th year in education, and one of the things I can say with confidence is that whenever things change, they change incredibly slowly. And the reason for that is probably intentional in some ways, that we need to take care in making systematic changes, especially if it impacts school districts across the state. But whenever we do something at the legislative level, which then gets discussed at the state board level, and all of the conversations that need to happen within protocol during that process, we're kind of seeing it now with the literacy bill. We're seeing how long this is going to take to really get it right, because the Wyoming Department of Education is scrambling and doing their best to get everything in order for all of the school districts. And I think eventually we will come up with a positive product. But I think any kind of systematic change that is so massive that's coming from the state level, I think is going to be a heavy lift in terms of the amount of years it's going to take to transition to what that looks like in the classroom. The classroom teachers are looking at outcomes. They're looking at the standards that they're teaching to, and they're hoping just for a moment that those standards will stay long enough in place so that when they take the outcome assessment, the state summative assessment, the YTOP, it'll actually be aligned to what they've been teaching. But as things change in their state and all the systems and the standards that get revised, all of that impacts the state assessment, which then impacts state accountability on how we're doing as schools. But a teacher, frankly, has a bit of a disadvantage, because by the time they get everybody where they need to be, the goals keep changing, the standards keep changing in terms of accountability, and that gets a little frustrating.
Representative Kelly, did you still have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing I want to be very clear about is that we're on the same page when it comes to mandating curriculum. I do have some curiosity, though, about why cursive, something that has been taught in formal schooling for centuries. It's not that, doesn't seem that important, because there's a lack of studies showing that it's inferior versus superior to handwriting. But when I'm looking at here, if we're talking about mandating curriculum, I'm seeing things on here. It was mentioned that signing electronically is taken over signing by hand. Plotting points on a coordinate plane. Talk about something that's been overtaken by computers years ago. I mean, how often do we actually do the X and Y axis with a pencil anymore? That's something I think that would be kind of silly to mandate to all the schools. Or physical and health safety, things such as things that we would expect parents to teach at home before the kids even show up for kindergarten. So my question is, why have we singled out cursive when you can hear the disagreement that that is a valuable piece of curriculum? And let's move beyond this whole thing about the state mandating. And I'm curious about what the issue is with cursive in particular when there's this long list of things being mandated.
Mr. Chairman,
Jones.
Representative Kelly, for respect for time, I held off on everything else. But I could certainly go for a cup of coffee and we could talk through all the rest of them as well.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman. Got two questions. One is a much broader one than the other. You've had a lot of practical experience in this whole business of education that many on this committee have not had anywhere close. So I want to ask a general question, the philosophy of this thing. Should we restrict the standards to things that every student must learn in order to be able to understand some of the rest of the learning that's available? Because it seems to me that there are a few issues, reading, the basic mathematics, in the science area, the scientific method and probably the periodic table and something like that. There are a few things that everybody has to know. And then there's a tremendous rich menu of other things that we can learn. And what we really want school districts is to pick some of those that they think they can do well, that are relevant to their students, to let the students get a flavor for what's out there and how you go about learning it, using what they're learning in the basics, but not set standards on those because there is such a broad thing, and there is. It's tremendously broad. I can tell you, Mr. Chairman, in 80 years, I haven't been able to touch a lot of what's out there and then find I can continue to learn all the time. So you aren't going to teach everything. So do we need to is that the way we ought to look at where we ought to set standards or not set standards? So it's sort of a philosophical question there. And the second question, Mr. Chairman, is much more specific. On page 6, line 7, right after cursive writing, it speaks to critical thinking. I'm afraid if we pass this bill as it stands right now, Mr. Chairman, we'll get a standard on critical thinking that's independent of anything else. Whereas I think critical thinking is sort of an objective in teaching all the other things. If it was teaching history, for example, maybe teaching about the Revolutionary War, you pick the Battle of Trenton and try to get students to think about what were General Washington's options at that time. What else could he have done? What would have been the consequences? And start learning about critical thinking that way by going back and looking at a historical situation, seeing what could have been done and what couldn't. How did he have to think about that? And not having a standard on it, on critical thinking. It's something you teach in the process of teaching all the other things. So, Mr. Chairman, reaction on those two.
Mr. Jones?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, appreciate your comments. I think to begin with, at some level, we have to determine what are the standards? What are we going to say is so essential that we are going to mandate those? I agree with that. And then there are other things that are certainly important and would be at the discretion of local school districts as long as they're fulfilling those standards in the first bucket. For me, if I might, when you were talking about the historical example, as a former history teacher and American government teacher, I'm happy that the Wyoming Department of Education has come out with more emphasis on civics and trying to bring more time into how we operate as a government, and civics is one of those reasons that we can sustain our society. And so I hope that those things get a revival of such. But I will just say this, on the WDE website, the Wyoming Department of Education website, under content and performance standards, I think their last two sentences summarize kind of the moral of the story, and that is standards do not dictate methodology, instructional materials used, or how that material is delivered. Those decisions are made at the local level by school boards and district staff. That's from the Wyoming Department of Education Content and Performance Standards page. I think that's the second bucket. Those things that maybe aren't mandated, but are a part of those ancillary things that you can teach. If you feel like it's a priority in your school district and that's something that your local school board wants to emphasize, then that's where it should happen.
Further questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Christensen.
Thank you, Chairman. Andrew Chase Christensen. I'm the state coordinator from the Wyoming Association of Secondary School Principals. I think if a bill like this is to pass, the mechanism by which we think about a 70% or whatever percent we end up landing upon is largely going to fall to our master schedules, which is a principal's domain. And if we think back to where the state does have some legislation here and we've got a mandate of 900 minutes for children, if we went to 70%, we're talking about 630 minutes spent on whatever form of instruction the legislature decides within this bill. I think it's been well had, the argument about whether we should be legislating curriculum at the outset beginning. But I would ask, if we're thinking about something like 630 minutes being spent on X, do we know how many minutes are being spent now? Has the committee taken a look at master schedules from across the state, asked principals to submit those, and seen where we're at with minutes? Because to my mind, I would expect that what you're going to find is that we're probably legislating something to a point where our ask that 70% of our time be spent here is probably saying you might be spending less. I mean, I think our teachers may be spending more time in these areas, especially when we think about the fact that science instruction is also overlapping with math. Social studies instruction is overlapping with ELA, reading, writing, all of those things. It all comes back to that spot. So before moving forward, I would just ask that the committee spend that time, find the actual information. How much of our time right now is being spent in K-5 on the instruction that you're asking with this bill? And when you have that answer, does this bill actually affect any change? And if it doesn't, then we shouldn't be legislating an area that all it does is throw some words on paper. Second, and I'm going to speak here a little bit from my position as state coordinator, but a little bit from my work in work-based learning and career-connected learning. To Representative Kelly's point earlier, he asked about the omission of CTE here, and certainly we have had at the K-5 level, maybe a CTE education is appropriate, maybe putting those in, but we talked about early CTE education. And I would put forward that we have an issue in Wyoming, well known and I think well agreed upon, that over 70% of our graduates, the people that we are investing heavily in, we spend a lot of money on education in the state. We're putting a lot of money into our students, and we're seeing them leave the state and our investment be fruitful elsewhere. I would argue that a lot of the reason for that is that we are not showing students the grand possibilities that exist in the Wyoming economy for them to succeed and them to have a career. And I think the earlier that we can make that happen, if we can have that happen in elementary school and middle school and high school at various levels and in various different ways, that we will see. And to Mr. Jones's point, it takes time to see. I mean, we have seen great change over the past few years within Wyoming education that we haven't seen the fruit from already. But I think right now, if we allow the changes that our State Board of Ed have put in place, our Department of Education has put in place, we're going to start to see some of the changes that I think this legislation tries to point toward. But especially if we're going to move forward with something like this, find out from principals exactly what your percentage is before you set it. Don't go blind into that. And we need to make career-connected learning a sincere emphasis so that we're not continuing to potentially just educate students for jobs that may only exist outside of state and not helping them see where their education can be spent inside the state. With that, I'll stand for questions, Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll ask you the same question I asked a little bit earlier. I think you too probably support the interest that this legislation is trying to address, but probably not the mechanism for addressing it. Do you have any thoughts on what path we can take that more effectively ensures we're prioritizing core educational necessities in those early grades and giving districts the understanding that they have the flexibility to not equally spend time across the board? How do we achieve that objective? And we're probably putting the cart before the horse a little bit, because asking you that in a little bit is going to be very helpful, but while you're here.
Yeah, Chairman Andrew, thank you, Senator Rothfuss. I'll be short because it's appropriately answered here. All I'm going to say is to commend the work that the State Board has done and WDE has done in that area to bring back what the requirements are so that we can get back to a focus for our teachers and allowing them to practice the art of teaching alongside the science of teaching. I do think, to Mr. Jones's point earlier, that using assessment to accomplish those goals is probably appropriate. But when we have a constantly moving target in terms of the standards we're teaching and a constantly moving target in terms of what that assessment looks like, the assessment means absolutely nothing. And that's what you have right now with your state assessment. It means absolutely nothing. The standards haven't been in place long enough. The assessment hasn't been in place long enough that there's comparable data. So get to a spot where we choose the right standards. And when I say we, I'm not talking the legislature. I'm talking about the State Board of Education and WDE where it's appropriately done. But get to a point where our assessment can tell us whether or not we're succeeding, and then we can make shifts.
Thank you. Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding the apparently arbitrary 70% number that we put up there, I think it's a good suggestion to find out if that number even means anything and see where we're at. But assuming we were to come up with an appropriate percentage from the state level, what complications do you see that, even if it's an appropriate number, what complications do you see arising from that when we consider, having been in the classroom, that what you plan on spending an amount of time on isn't necessarily what happens once the kids show up?
Chairman Andrew, Representative Kelly, I mentioned early in that, I think the only mechanism by which you can say that you're going to measure that is looking at a master schedule. And we're going to ask at some point for schools to submit their master schedule at the elementary to the state board or to WDE. WDE is going to take a look at that and say, we mandate 900 minutes of instruction at the elementary level, and that means 630 have to be spent here. Does your master schedule show that you spend 630 minutes? That's going to be the measure. There is going to be no measure that gets down to the classroom level on an individual teacher of was instruction spent there. Additionally, when we do have teachers that, to your point, we make a lesson plan, we're planning for that instruction, but we go another direction. Instruction is still on those standards. Like that, the time would still be being spent on those standards, even if we're not following the lesson plan that we set ourselves for that day.
Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify then, the WDE Legislature Education Committee would only have to go based on the master schedules that were turned in, and there's no way of verifying if that's actually what was followed anyway. So I guess I'm just not seeing the point of having that number.
Chairman Andrew.
Please go ahead.
Agreed.
All right, further questions. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I want to come back to one thing that the witness said about assessment tests. It seems to me that they are telling us quite a good deal about what's going on. I grant that they don't tell us much about implementation of the specific standards because they're also new, and there's so many of them that nobody's paying attention to them very successfully right now. But in 2020, the consultants we had hired for the recalibration, which are the same consultants we hired again by and large this time, said that the students that were testing on the third and fourth grade English language arts and that were scoring in the basic and below basic categories there and in the same categories on the federal NAEP test, we're not going to be able to perform in the modern high-tech economy that we are trying to build. And that tells us a great deal. And I think it's still telling us is that, so the assessment test does it not, maybe it doesn't deal with the specific standards we got right now, but it tells us what we're really interested. Can the students function successfully later in life? Like your reaction to that one.
Christensen.
Chairman Andrew, Senator Scott, our fourth grade NAEP scores right now show that we're again in the top 5 in the country. I'm not going to dispute the fact that we have a long ways to go to say that we are accomplishing the best education possible for our kids. But I will say that we are accomplishing very nearly the best education of any state in this nation.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator
follow up
Scott.
on that. The same consultants said that most people think that, knowledgeable people think that American performance is not very good. And they said doing better than an unsatisfactory average is not something to be touted.
Mr. Christensen.
Chairman Andrew, that was what I said in the first part of my answer. Thank you.
All right, further questions? Seeing none. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning to the Interim Committee on Education. My name is Mark Mathern, and I am the current chair of the State Board of Education. While I'm not here to advocate for a specific approach that the committee is taking, I do want to fill in maybe some gaps or at least provide some additional understanding of the work that the State Board is currently doing. The work of that this bill is desiring to do is actually being done right now by the State Board. We're in that process, and as you've heard already this morning, the process takes time. The board shares the concerns that we've had over the workload that teachers have shared with us, and that is why we engaged in a reduction of standards. As a matter of fact, we began by asking districts, which standards are you prioritizing? And rather than arbitrarily picking a number of 1, 3, 5, 7 standards that you're working on, we brought folks together and asked them what are the priority standards that they're working on. And that's where we began to try to look for some uniformity across the entire state. That resulted in somewhere between 50 and 70% of reduction in the standards that we currently have, and we continue to work on those. We also have the guidance from the legislature that's been pointed out this morning by Senator Rothfuss regarding reading and math shall be emphasized at the elementary level. When we provide guidance letters to our standards review committees, we use phrases like that come directly from the legislation. And in the language arts standards that are currently being considered, and we're just beginning to open up for public comment, there is an acknowledgement that reading is an extremely important one of the 10 content areas. And consequently, if more standards are needed to get to help our students read, if more direction is needed for teachers to provide concepts that are in the reading bill and those kind of things, the board welcomes a set of standards that would be greater than, say, foreign language or physical education or music. We understand that there are going to be more standards in reading, writing, and math. So that guidance letter that we provide tries to outline that concept. We also have to really ask the question, what makes the system uniform? And that's part of our work. How do we deliver the basket of goods across the state, and which standards are acknowledge that? So one thing we've done in addition is we also have guidance from the legislature that says standards shall be taught. It doesn't necessarily say standards shall be tested. And I know that seems a little bit ironic, but I'll just leave it at that point. The board has taken that concept and said, let's make sure we are testing reading, writing, and math at the elementary level. Let's make sure we're teaching all of the content areas, but we are not requiring that the district has an entire assessment system for every single standard, for every single content area. We emphasize the ones that are particularly important: reading, writing, math, science, social studies. Those are the ones that need to be tested in the uniform system. We bring these standards review committees together that include teachers, community members, college professors, experts in the field. We ask them questions about what are the standards that they believe are important for students to know and be able to do. And that has worked quite well in terms of these committees. They're generally 40 to 50 people. It generally takes, several meetings over the course of sometimes 2 and 3 years to work through to come up with a set of standards. As a matter of fact, the language arts standards that are coming to the board in the next few months have been worked on for quite a number of years because the state board rejected the first set 5 years ago, saying that there were too many and there needed to be some additional work. So the next step for the state board is to go back to our teachers now, after there's been a reduction of 50 to 70% of the standards, and saying, how close did we come? Did we get it right? Are these the actual standards that we think all students ought to know and be able to do? A particular example is something, one of the standards that has real concern among math teachers. And it basically argues that a student has to successfully get through like an Algebra 2 or a trigonometry class to meet this standard. So that would be an example of where the board would go back and say, well, maybe not every graduate needs to have this standard to march across that stage. So we continue to work on that idea of reducing the standards, trying to emphasize reading, writing, math, and science at that elementary level, or K-8 level, actually. I do want to also comment, Mr. Chair, about the pyramid. I think the pyramid is really a good visual to try to figure out how do we integrate 10 content areas into our education system. I think it needs more work. As a matter of fact, I've asked Diana to bring it to the board and ask us to really look at it. Is this something that we think would be valuable for every district? We don't know. The first time I've seen it was, in some of the work that your subcommittee had performed. So I did want to point out one other thing in that pyramid. It's the first time I've seen a document that has the profile of a graduate at the apex of the pyramid. That's awesome. That means that there's this acknowledgement by the legislature, if indeed we're going to move this way, that students marching across that stage should look like the profile when they cross that line. And because the word profile is nowhere in statute. This is just this idea of how do we think about graduation standards. And so that piece I saw as pretty pleasing. So those are just some comments I wanted to make regarding the work we are doing on the standards. And I certainly stand for any questions. Diana may have some additional comments she'd like to make as well.
Right, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Diana Clapp, Coordinator for the State Board of Education. I'll just briefly maybe share with you the process for this standards review and revisions. I appreciate Representative Lawley's comments about when you came on this committee, I remember the conversations about the concerns about the volume of standards, that load, as well as the volume of testing. And I think Chairman Mathern has shared with you that the board has worked both on the standards reductions as well as the testing burden, particularly at the primary levels. But when you think about these standards, Chairman Mathern talked a little bit about the audits that went through with the work with districts, post-secondary, a number of groups working to audit the current standards, which, by the way, if you recall, were the Common Core state standards that you remember those years, right? So that was a lot to take on and look at. Now the process, the board has that standards review committee. Yes, approximately 40 members. There's a call out statewide for people to participate in that. It involves educators, business, and parents on that committee. And they do work a number of months on reviewing those standards, looking at the research in that content area. In fact, the conversation you had this morning about cursive, print, handwriting is very emblematic of the extensive conversations these groups have as they deliberate about what a quality education is, what is supported by research, what upholds the values and expectations across Wyoming. Another piece the board put into this process now is called the Curriculum Directors Advisory Committee. It is made up of curriculum directors from small to large schools, regionally situated, and their role is to protect and ensure the state doesn't grow to 2,000 standards again, right? So while you have a group that's very concentrated on their subject area, they're very passionate about it, and sometimes they're ambitious, right? So now there's this balance with these curriculum directors whose job in their district is to look across all content areas to say, does this balance? Does this work with the instructional time allowed and the other content areas to be taught? So that's a rather new piece that the board has put into its process. And again, just a huge lift from the Department of Ed in getting through this. As far as participation, the department puts out a pre-survey to educators before that standards review committee even meets. And then the department brings samples from various states. They bring research. They bring the results of this survey for that committee to work from. That committee works. You've got your curriculum director advisory committee. And then another piece in the process that is not mandated in statute, other than you've been very direct with the state board that their work is to be done in collaboration with the state superintendent and communities and school districts. Those standards are put out for an informal review statewide where people can comment on them, make their suggestions, and then that information goes back to the board, back to the standards review committee. Now, this all happens before they formally go out for rule promulgation and public comment. And so, yes, the process is generally about 18 months, right? And then the work begins to make the adjustments to the blueprints for the assessment and then getting that everything aligned, all those other pieces that you heard about, the state assessment, accountability, the accreditation. One other piece that I would share that has been now added to the process as well. With this reduction, we're talking about the continuum of a child's learning. I appreciate this conversation because it is so serious. We know, those educators in the room know what it is to deal with children with educational gaps, right? Serious work. So now the board, after this reduction of standards, 65, 70%, some might say that's not enough. Some might say that cut too deep. But the board knows that type of work isn't going to hit square bullseye right out of the chute. They are going back to the classroom teachers now that they've had a year to teach the reduced math and science standards. They've been tested. They'll get those state results. Now the process includes going back and saying, how did this do? What are you seeing? Are there red flags? Are there gaps that would be of a concern as that student continues through its school years? So I know you've been long on this topic. Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to share just step by step the processes and pieces that are in place.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just want to mention that within the working group, that was definitely a constant theme, that there's a high degree of appreciation for the work that the board has done to reduce those standards. And one of the goals of this bill is to really, acknowledge that and not necessarily create something that sends everyone back to square one on this. But everyone seemed to appreciate that. It seems to be working out very well for a lot of the teachers who are in this group. So thank you. Questions from the committee? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, and let me preface my question by saying that I've known Mr. Mathern for
Couple of years.
yeah, a long time, and longer than either of us care to remember specifically. And I've developed considerable respect for his ability and thinking on this. I want to ask a question on something we haven't explored today. The point in having standards is to improve the education that specific children are getting. What do we do when, take reading, when a child doesn't meet the key standards there? And when you look, Mr. Chairman, on page 4, lines 1 through 6, if you sort of draw a line after, which is the reading standards, you draw a line after comprehension and saying the things before that are essential to the rest of instruction. What do we do with a kid that is in 3rd or 4th grade and hasn't learned well enough to meet the standards on the part of that that's before comprehension? I can see a number of options. The one option is to simply retain them in grade. That's a pretty much drastic step. When my kids were in Dean Morgan Junior High here in Casper, the mathematics program divided their learning up into semesters and did a test at the end of each semester that was a rigorous test with very easy testing conditions. And if the student failed, it had to repeat that particular segment, which is something that works particularly well in mathematics, Mr. Chairman, where everything builds on everything else. Is that a possibility? What should we do to make sure that the standards are getting translated in what the individual student actually learns?
Mr. Mathern.
Mr. Chair, Senator Scott, I have to go back to just my own life experience as I think about that, because when I think about the role of the state board in a sense saying, here's the what, we really leave it to districts and to teachers on the how. And so if the what hasn't come across, as you point out, Senator Scott, it seems to me we have to look at that other kind of research that's available for how do we deliver it for a student that is not getting it, if you will, the first time. In my own life, it's really connected to meaningful work. It's connected to what is meaningful. And I'll use my one of my sons as an example. Didn't like to read, but he loved electronics. He could devour an electronics manual beyond my understanding. And so he learned to read through his love of electronics. And it really goes back to that idea of what is meaningful and the difficulty of trying to separate the content areas, reading, writing, math, science, CTE, et cetera. Because the person who loves music may learn to read through that love of music, and the person who loves electronics may learn to read through that. And so for us to keep these as discrete content areas, I think is really difficult, particularly for the student that is struggling with learning to read. So I think that idea of connecting it to meaningful work and then intervening for the student using their interests as the catalyst to help them to learn to read, I think is at least one thing I would do as a teacher to try to, in a sense, turn that student on to the love of reading.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you. Follow up.
that makes some sense to me. In my own personal experience, my dad really got me reading by reading to me about some of the history that he was interested in. And okay, I wanted to go beyond, and I took to reading those things automatically. But what do you do? What we're seeing is a lot of students that just aren't grasping the basics here. That what do we do about them so that they don't go through the cracks? Because you aren't going to be able to find a systematic way of reaching all of them with okay, find something they're fascinated in, get them reading in that. How do we go about dealing with a student who doesn't understand the phonics, the phonemic awareness, decoding, et cetera, that this statute is speaking to?
Mr. Chair.
I'm looking for something, Mr. Chairman, so that we do bring up the great number of students that we have. They're not a majority, but they're a significant, very significant minority that are not learning those things. What do we do about it?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, I do think the further away you get from someone's ability to read, the more individualized the solution has to be. And indeed, it may take intervention after intervention after intervention to help that student. Some of the work that's being done with multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS as an example, I think is an effort to try to individualize the instructions so that reading does occur. I am not a reading teacher per se, and I don't want to speak outside of my understanding there. So I'm going to kind of leave it at that, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair.
Coachwoman Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we're kind of a little short on time on this topic, but just something that has come up quite a bit. I appreciate the work you've been doing, and particularly with the reduction in standards. I think that's the key. If we can let teachers get back to teaching instead of having to deal with all these standards. I hear that complaint. I heard it when I was teaching myself, particularly in the grades 1 through 5. Is there any way to, I mean, I know even the legislature, we're guilty of this. Sometimes it takes us 3 years to get a bill across the line. It shouldn't take that long. And I'm kind of wondering, is there any way for you folks to be able to streamline maybe what you're doing? Because I keep thinking about, a profile of a teacher now is so different from what it was. We had a lot of teachers when I was coming through that would teach for 20, 25 years, 30. I think most of our teachers now, if they make it through the first 3 to 5 years, we're lucky to have that. But in order for them to be able to reap the benefits of what you're doing, is there any way to streamline the process?
You want to take a shot?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, thank you for that question. I would actually say there is a process in place for the State Board of Education to do just that. Certainly, they have access to engage in emergency rules. If there was something that came up that comprehensive, very participatory 18-month process just that did not meet the needs of students and the continuum of their learning, I think the board could engage in that process. Certainly they may. Some might say that's not a very prompt process either, but that is available to them. I know your question probably went in a little different direction than that. But again, I think the board is pretty confident in that balance of that process. that it isn't reactive, but also they can streamline it. And certainly there's several of these steps that they could forego in their 18-month process if they needed to streamline that.
Mr. Chair,
good.
just to follow up, Senator Schuler, I'm an old Latin teacher, and I think of the phrase festina lente, make haste slowly. And it's really that idea of, and some of the folks who spoke before talked about, once we make a decision, once we set that in place, it affects, 80,000 students. And so how do we do it in a way that is going to be reflective of that large number? And so while it does take a long time, as a matter of fact, once the standards are adopted by the board, they go to the governor for his signature or her signature. And then the teachers have 3 years to implement, school districts, because it involves curriculum materials. It involves all kinds of additional resources. So a decision by us on Friday takes 3 years to show up in the classroom. And in some respects, I think that's a good thing because of the gravity of the decision that we end up making.
Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had a lot of high-level discussion here, and I appreciate the efforts of the State Board of Education, but something I'm interested in that give me a better feel of what we're doing here. What was your gut reaction to this bill when you first saw it?
Let's go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Kelly, my first reaction was, we're already doing this. My second reaction, me speaking not as the board chair, but as an educator, is it's extremely restrictive. When the legislature has one sentence that says reading and math shall be emphasized, or K2 foreign language shall be taught, that little sentence has huge implications. So when I saw a bill that had 3 pages of area after area after area after area, that concerned me greatly because it puts a level of specificity at such a high point. Every one of the words that's in this document has its own debate. And I think that was really difficult for me as a teacher to say, boy, how do I implement this? And just a simple example, the 70% concept. So if I am teaching, I have the Constitution in front of me and the students, and they're deciphering what's in the Constitution. Is that reading or is that social studies? And if they're using, I don't know, computer concepts, is that also CTE? And I think the idea of trying to parse that, I just thought, how could we even implement this? So that was my reaction.
Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none, I think we'll take a 15-minute break before continuing public testimony, which means we'll be back. Let's come back at 10:40.
Just about there.
The meeting will come back to order. Before we get to the rest of public comment, we'll have a quick chance for President Reeves to introduce himself to the committee. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. It's great to see everybody, and I appreciate the giving me some time to introduce myself briefly. Hopefully you all know Mike, who's sitting next to me also. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about who I am and why I'm excited to be here, and a little bit about my background. So I am your president, 29th president of the University of Wyoming. My name's Shane Reeves. I'm originally from Rock Springs and spent 30 years in the Army. And I was just, Mike and I when we were coming over here, he pointed out that right behind you all is the Natrona football field. And I have very fond memories of being in Casper because that was my one moment of glory. I remember recovering an onside kick to beat Natrona my senior year right back there. And that could have been peak for me right there. I think that actually was the top. I am a product of public schools in Wyoming, and I'm extremely appreciative of the opportunities I was provided as a young person, and have incredible memories of my teachers. And I can remember them by name, but there was a few things that stand out. When I think back to those days, they were fun, they were inspirational, but they also held us accountable and they pushed us. And I remember their names to this day, and I think back to the opportunities they provided through that nice mutual interaction between fun and inspiration and accountability. I'm really excited to be part of the broader Wyoming educational apparatus as the president of the university. It is not lost on me. We have such an important part in preparing our young people from the state to be successful. Obviously, at the university, there's a heavy focus on education and research, and that really translates into something that's tangibly important to be successful in this quickly evolving economic and national, I'd even say global environment. And that's really to provide them an intellectual foundation so that they can successfully navigate the ambiguities, the complexities, and the uncertainties of the modern economy and the modern world. And really that comes through creating critical thinkers who have also done something else. And I think this is where the University of Wyoming is so exciting to be at, which is some of those intangible, traditional Wyoming values. And there's an extra part to this educational model, which is developing them to have some grit, to have character, and to have independence of thought and action. And when you combine a rigorous and robust academic experience, that's excellent, and you combine it with those values that I just mentioned, well, what you're really doing is you're creating graduates that are going to be very successful in competing, not just in the state of Wyoming, but elsewhere. And I say that because what I think the economy and what the country, really the world is looking for are young people that have those those abilities to think for themselves, those critical thinking skills, but also have some of those underlying values. Again, that grit, character, and independence of thought and action oftentimes translates into a confidence, and that confidence means they're competitive and willing to be competitive with anybody at any time. And so that's really my charge is to prepare those young people. And of course, really excited about the opportunities at the University of Wyoming. Senator Scott and I were just talking. I don't think it is too unlikely or too far-fetched that the university can be one of the great land-grant state institutions in this country. And I think that's in the near future. Again, couldn't be more excited to meet all of you. I would like to take a moment to thank you. I know you all put some effort into raising the Hathaway Scholarship in this last legislative session. Thank you for doing that, and it's very much appreciated. And with that, I just wanted to say hello and thanks for the time.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Good question. Okay. All right, we will go back to public testimony on the K through 5 bill. Who in this room is still planning to testify on this bill? Can you raise your hand? All right, 2 more after this group. That looks right. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Sarah Bieber, Natrona County. So I don't have a whole lot of support for the bill as it's written right now. The idea is definitely needed, in my opinion. So 21-9-101, where it defines the areas, the common core of knowledge for the state of Wyoming. Define that. If we want to teach or want kids to read, what does that mean? What does that include? How would you explain that? Because down the line, the State Board of Education and the other entities, that's where they get their direction from. And you guys have heard multiple times, more direction, more solid, this is the direction that we want to go. I think simple definitions help you defend and define education as a whole. What you can guarantee across the state in every school district, and that's important. But just saying reading isn't a definition, and it leaves it arbitrary. We heard in June from a couple different people about the inequities of PE, why it's necessary, why it's needed, but our school districts are using it as a punishment or not doing it or not following through. It's included in the basket right now. It's included on there. So we already have inequities. They're not guaranteed just because there's a standard to not be inequity. Something like locally provided educational opportunities, fine arts, PE, health and safety, humanities, CTE, foreign languages, cultures, computer science. If you allow the local school districts to have that, to decide those things with their locally elected school boards, it gives them more control over what their district needs, what their student bodies need. It allows them flexibility to respond while maintaining a common core of knowledge of the other subjects. That's important. But you also needed to define those other subjects, those core subjects. I do agree with some of the definitions that are currently in the LSO draft for this. I wouldn't say all of them. I'll also say that the idea of defining doesn't automatically mean that we're talking about standards or that standards have to change. Are we not teaching subtraction? Is that what we're saying? The standard for math in first and second and third grade doesn't necessarily have to change or be completely revamped. We are teaching those things. Those are already standards. You heard testimony to that fact today. So just because you're defining the common core of knowledge, 21-9-101, doesn't mean that the State Board of Education has to completely have a come apart and redo everything. We already have standards. They could be really good standards. There could also be some in there that we need to bring in a little bit and refine a little bit. There was a couple comments about CTE and other job opportunities. We shouldn't be trying to educate as a state children to be workers or children to even stay here. It's not the role of the government. It's not the role of the education system. We don't own these children. They should be educated in the art of learning so that they can learn, so that they can grow and go and do what they need to do where they're directed, not where we direct them. Those aren't fair statements, in my opinion. The locally provided educational opportunities that I spoke about, Campbell 4, that judgment and that decision gives that standing. Campbell 4's ruling said that there are variations in local availability for programs like CTEs and activities. It went further to say that some of those opportunities that are provided at the local level are going to vary. Art, the other things. So it did identify that there can be variation at the local district, and that just because it's in the basket of goods doesn't necessarily guarantee, like I said, that it's equitable across the entire state. I'm going to hit on a couple different things. If we can't defend it, which we haven't been able to, and recalibration is an example of that, we come out with something drastically different. We've done recalibration every year since 2010. We haven't passed the bills. The bills that instituted the recalibration that was mandated by the court decisions in Campbell just didn't get passed. So now that we have a recalibration bill that actually passed, we are still working through what that all looks like, but that by itself doesn't mean that there's instantly going to be fixes to everything. We need to continue to work the definitions and giving that structure at the state level so that the other entities in education can continue to make sure that our kids are getting the sound education that they deserve. Senator Scott spoke earlier and asked questions about how do we catch those kids? We can do a better job of catching those kids that are falling through the cracks if we have a better definition about what our basket of good actually includes, what it actually means, what it actually details. And it progresses through from the psychological stage of kindergarten all the way through high school, instead of kind of doing a hodgepodge job. I think that's all I had. Stand for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Senator Scott.
I'm intrigued by the discussion of the Campbell 4 case. And pose a question that maybe would be best asked of the attorneys, but how much leeway do we have given Campbell 4 in terms of the differences amongst the several districts?
Chair,
Please go ahead.
Senator Scott, absolutely think that is a great question for LSO. I'm not a lawyer. That's not my background, so I can't answer that definitively. I think that because Campbell 4 recognized that there are differences in every district for educational opportunities and offerings that are offered and mandated by the state, that would give quite a bit of room.
Ms. Heitrick.
Yes, certainly, Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott. I think it goes back even farther than that. I think the whole series of Campbell cases recognized that the delivery of education may be different across school districts. I think the key concept is that they have the opportunity for the same education across the state, whether it's in Sundance or Natrona. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that to teach PE, you have to have a swimming pool in every school district. There are certain obligations or standards that you're required to teach. Maybe it's some type of, movement or motion of the body. And Natrona uses their pool, but Lusk doesn't have a pool, so they use their gymnasium to teach that same skill. So it's not necessarily in how the skill is taught, but that the skill is available and that standard is equitable across the state.
Thank you. Would you follow up? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, follow up on that one, and then I have a very different question. Take the example we were talking about earlier with this district having the Mandarin Chinese immersion program. The fact that this district can offer it and the smaller ones can't, that doesn't get us in trouble with Campbell decisions, does it?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, districts have a wide latitude in the delivery of education. There are basic standards or standards for each school district, for each grade band for those subjects that are contained in 21-9-101. And that is the measure whereby the court determines whether a student has equitable and adequate and a thorough education. It's not necessarily, this school district has a great CTE program and another school district, teaches it through woodworking as opposed to welding. The Campbell decisions don't get into that level of specificity. The way that we ensure equitable and equal access is through the basket of goods. And I think I wrote a memo on that actually for the last meeting that talked about this very thing. I'm happy to send that out to the committee again.
Thank you, Senator Scott.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, back to the witness. We have a number of standards that are for teaching things that are essential to learning other subjects. Reading, basic mathematics, in the 3rd to 5th grade, the scientific method, that sort of thing. We have to worry about the standards actually meaning something in terms of the education that the children get and doing something about those that don't grasp the standard, don't learn that material. What's your thoughts on how we go about identifying which standards are the key and ensuring that the students do learn those things that are essential so they can learn all the other stuff?
I think there's a lot of different ways. Oh, sorry, Chair, Senator. I think there's a lot of different ways that can be accomplished. So Wyoming is great in the fact that it has multifaceted, multidisciplinary supports. MTSS is a perfect example of that, multi-tiered systems of support for students that struggle. Everybody gets tier 1 and you move up from there. I think that those kinds of implementations from the state level and then throughout our school districts is helpful for students that need that extra support. How and where we start and how do we catch those? I think it goes back to how are we holding accountable to the standards? The State Board of Education testified today that they reduced standards by 60 to 70%, that they got rid of a huge chunk of them. Where was the accountability in the fact that how did we get there? Why did it bloat so much? What were we testing in our state test? Because we don't just use a normative national test like NAEP. We have our own state test, YTOP. So I think that it is important that our accountabilities, our accountability system, which is a completely different act, has those built into it. If this, then that. If this is triggered, then that kind of accountability happens. Accreditation is another thing. If you have a school district that has, then that. if this happens, then that happens. And the different supports that come from the state level, the district level for individual schools not meeting accountability within the district, all of those different things help. But I think it needs to be more concise on the support for students and not just this system or the structure. Does that answer your question? Okay.
All right, thank you. Representative Kelly.
No.
All right, further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Good morning.
Thank you for letting me speak. I'm Mary Schmidt. I did bring this to you months ago, and I was part of the working group. All but one session, I missed the first one. But I want to start with this, and I think this was something that the working group struggled with, and I somewhat feel we're still struggling with it today with the various organizations that have spoken. So I'm going to give you kind of an educational analogy type of thing. The orders of operation that we have to use when we look at a math problem. You have to look at the parentheses first, the exponents, then you multiply, divide, add, and subtract. If you don't do it in that order, things get out of a line and you get the wrong answer. So I'm going to ask that we look at the orders of operation of how this education system in Wyoming works. It clearly states in Article 1, Section 23 of Education, that it is the right of a citizens to the opportunities for education should have practical recognition. That practical recognition is directly shown in statute 21-9-101. And I'm kind of confused on the bill draft that came out, that LSO didn't just take that statute, because those under I, the Common Core of Knowledge, is what we were revamping and focusing on. And the bill doesn't necessarily reflect that. So that's my confusion, and maybe somebody can clear that up for me. But my intent of looking at this bill is one that instead of doing statute 21-9-101 out of the subject matter, I would like us to look at it in grade bands. And that is kind of where the bill somewhat does. We take the kindergarten through second grade as one grade band. Then we do third grade through fifth. Then we do 8th through 9th, or 6th through 8th, and then the high school. With that being said, we've kind of done that in this bill, except that I think there needs some things that needs to be revised. For example, the K through 2, we need to just totally eliminate numbers, page 4 starting on line 13, page 4 starting on line 18, page 4 starting on line 22, and page 6 starting on 4, page 6 starting on 9. Eliminate those for kindergarten through second grade. Don't even list those. The only thing we're going to focus on is page 4, line 2, reading, and then math, number 2. Those are the only two subject matters that we need to define for K through 2. Doesn't mean at all that the other subject matters can't be taught. But what our objective is, and this was one that we concentrated on the working session, is it gives the power back to the districts through the teachers. The teachers can teach those other subject matters through reading, through math, without having a standard associated with it. And it is the job of the legislature to create this, that which the state board will then promulgate the standards from. And from the standards, the Department of Ed will create your assessments and your rules, and then the school districts will implement it. And that's the order of operation that we should be looking at. And so I really think that this Common Core of Knowledge needs to go by the grade bands like we have broken out. In the definitions that we have in here, I think they're a little too specific. They're too standard word language versus legislative language. And part of that is, I think, because the majority of the working group were superintendents, principals, and they live in standard worlds. That's the world they operate within, and so they brought their language to this discussion. But I think you, as the legislative body, needs to look at it in a more broader sense. So for example, for the reading and language arts standards, I wouldn't define it necessarily with the specificity of decoding and encoding. I would just simply say spelling, vocabulary, the handwriting subject issue that came up. it's a simple solution. You teach manuscript through second grade, which is the printing, because children need to learn how to print their name first. And then from third grade through fifth grade, you teach cursive. You expand on it. You can teach cursive through teaching history by having them copy the Declaration of Independence, whatever, Magna Carta, however you want to do it. The teacher wants to do it, but it's up to the teacher to decide that. And they can learn cursive. They can memorize a historical document all in one sitting by one skill set. So that is kind of giving that freedom back to those elementary teachers instead of telling an elementary teacher, you have to be an expert on A through N on the basket of goods, which is not fair. They can't do that. And it has become a problem. And so that's why we're trying to limit this. So if we can take out those other portions of this bill, just define reading, language arts, and mathematical or arithmetic, and then in third through fifth grade, you basically take those same definitions that you had, those same sections for K through 2, and you put that into third through fifth grade, same ones. You're just now going into a deeper level of literature and of studying. Then you can slowly work back in the science, the history, and grow it that way. High school is pretty simple. It's already set in other standards. I believe it's in 21-24-107, what we need. You need the 4 Englishes, you need 3 histories. All we have to do is put, for those grades, you need those 3 histories, 3 Englishes, and it can be simple. I would specify that you want US history, you want world history, you want economics and government. That's it. Science is easy. Chemistry, biology, physical science. That's how you define it. And then then let the schools grow beyond this. That's where the freedom and the local control can be brought back into this. If we prescribe the very core of it, which if you look at 21-9-101, it specifically says in II for grades 1 through 8, reading, writing, and mathematics shall be emphasized under the common core of knowledge, specified under paragraph B(I) of this section, which means that 70% part, that can go. Just delete it out. That wasn't ever, I think, the intent of the working group to put that. It was more of a model that we were using to start specifying what we wanted to focus on subject matter. So I don't think, and that's probably just a miscommunication between the working group and LSO that 70% came from. It is pretty universal of that group. No, take that out. It's already established in 21-9-101. Just leave it as is and then do it by grade band. And that will go for your enforcement. You can enforce it by only what standards you've created. So if you're breaking this down by age, by grade band, that's what the standard will come from. That is what they can assess a school on, is that simplified. It makes it much easier, and it's the way you can assess the schools for what they're doing. The great thing about the bill that I do definitely support is the staggered approach of implementing it. If you outline these by grade bands, the state board can then turn around on July 1 of next year, take that outline, go through their standards, eliminate what they need to. It's pretty simple. They just chop the subjects that aren't covered, and they do their part. They have a year to do that, or if you want to extend it, 1.5 years. Then it goes to the Department of Ed. They can then look at their assessment, YTOP, and they can adjust the YTOP to go with those standards. And from there, the districts can be watching this, and then the districts are implementing it. So they've got several years to implement it. It's not something they have to do right away. The one key factor is we talked about NAEP scores. NAEP is a national test. It picks its students that they want to test. It is not a broad spectrum of Wyoming students when we get that NAEP score, but it does tell us reading. YTOP does not tell us anything about reading. If you change this common core of knowledge to emphasize reading, then that will direct the state board and the Department of Ed to change YTOP to assess reading. If that's the case, then we can rely on our own state data instead of relying on the national data as to whether how good our kids are reading or not, which is truly what we want. If they can read, if they can write, if they can do math, they can do anything they want. And that is truly the notion of a practical education. It is not our job, and I have to reiterate what Sarah said, it is not our job to make little worker bees. That is not the intent of the public education system. It is to educate. And from that education, every child has the intellect to determine their life's path, whether it be staying here, whether it be leaving the state, whatever. It's their choice. And that is our job. And that, I think, is the intent behind the education section in the Constitution. And I think we need to get back to that. We really are pushing CTE and all these things. And it's very scary to me because we keep talking about kids, about workforce and jobs and where they're going to go. If you look at the top 4 or 5 degrees that are issued by the University of Wyoming, kinesiology is one of them. We cannot possibly employ all of those kids at University of Wyoming in kinesiology in this state. They're not choosing degrees for this state that we offer jobs in. So we need to stop functioning. And I'm not saying those kids don't deserve it. They can take kinesiology and they can go wherever they want in the world. And that's great. But stop looking at them as worker bees and looking them as human beings who deserve a public or a practical education to determine their path. And I think this is the best way to do it. And I think we've gotten a good start, but there's some refining that we need to go with. And I hope that we can all work together to do that. I stand for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, when you look at the material on page 4 and 5 and 6, I've got it marked, and I think you were going down the same route that 3, 4, and 5, those subheadings on page 4 and 4, 5 and 6 subheadings on page 5 and 6 ought to be out of the bill. And I'm going to have 2 questions. One's really ultimately for the attorneys as to what the effect of just taking those out of the bill is, whether the state board could still promulgate standards in those areas if we do that. And the question I have for you is, should we allow the state board to promulgate standards in those areas, or should we tell them, no, don't promulgate standards in those areas, just promulgate them in the remaining ones that are critical to the students learning further down the line?
Please go ahead.
Chairman Andrew, do you want the LSO to speak first, or do you want me to answer the questions?
Either way.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Yes, I agree. Those standards or those sections should be taken out for kindergarten through 2nd grade. And no, I do not believe, I think it's inefficient, waste of money for the state board to promulgate standards that aren't necessary, that we don't want to focus on. We're not testing on them, so why are we creating a standard for them? So no, they don't need to create that standard. They should only create the standards based off of how you write out this Common Core of knowledge. So, and for each grade band. Now, I would say that when you get to 3rd grade, you're going to be bringing in more subjects. I do agree with the sections under the 3rd grade where we bring in some of the humanities and the histories, and they will need to promulgate standards for those once we expand it. But they should be only promulgating standards based off of how you break it out by grade band. And they can look at the existing standards and see how they fit first and make the changes according to that, and then go from there. If they need to adjust some of them, they can, but that's why you give them in the bill a year or year and a half to do so, to give them time to review that and go through that.
Thank you.
I think that was it.
Ms. Heitrick.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, you could certainly remove those paragraphs that you listed. You'll note that not all the Common Core standards contained in 21.9.101 are listed within these sort of subsections. With regard to prohibition, I think you would, if you do not want the State Board of Education promulgating standards on, say, fine and performing arts, 21.9.101 would need to be amended to prohibit those, or perhaps, break out that these standards have to be for these subjects, for these grades. But it would definitely require sort of reworking 21-9-101. But there's no reason why you couldn't do that. That's a policy decision for the committee to make.
All right, thank you. Senator Scott.
Chairman, I didn't fully understand the answer, if I may follow up on that.
Sure.
So if we don't want standards in these other areas, we have to prohibit the board or modify some other statute? I'm unclear.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, currently, the state board is charged with creating content and performance standards for those areas listed in 21-9-101. In the event that you wanted to only have those standards, that entire suite of standards applicable to certain grade bands, you would need to rewrite the statute. I don't think it requires a prohibition, but the obligations of the state board would change fairly drastically. And perhaps Chairman Mather would like to weigh in on that.
Follow up? Okay. All right, further questions? Seeing none, thank you. All right. The last two comments, I believe. Anyone else in the room? All right, we'll close public testimony after this. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, my name is Brian Farmer. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming School Boards Association. Pleased to be joined by Mr. Scott Stoltz, who is the new Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of School Administrators, our Superintendent's Association. We've spent some time talking about the bill. And I think, Mr. Chairman, our first question when we got it was a question that Representative Kelly asked of another witness. What was your initial impression? And I think our first question was, why? What is the bill trying to accomplish? We didn't understand the purpose or the direction of what the goal was. And so, Mr. Chairman, I really appreciated this morning you began by kind of trying to clarify that. You set out, our goal is to ensure that we're reducing that workload for teachers, that we're making sure that the content we expect our students to learn is a manageable amount, and that we're really focusing on those expectations of the educational system. And I think that's very helpful to have sort of that framework. And so my comments will really reflect sort of thoughts regarding that initial goal and potentially, but I think the most important question that's been asked so far has been from Senator Rothfuss asking multiple witnesses, so what should we do? What can we do to achieve that objective? And I would say that I think it's important for us to make sure we have a common understanding of some of the things that we're talking about here. So to back way up, the 29-1-101 is sometimes referred to as the Common Core of Knowledge and Skills. Sometimes it's also called the basket of goods. But this is the content that the legislature expects to be delivered to school kids. This is what we want our kids to have an education on. And so we've listed out this common core of knowledge. What do we want the kids to know? And it's been the legislature's prerogative to define what is it that is in that basket of goods. And then we go to the state board, and the State Board of Education has been the one to develop standards. Now, really, there's two types of standards. There's a content standard, which is what do we expect our students to know and be able to do? And then there's something known as a performance standard. And a performance standard is a question of how good is good enough. And so we ask those two questions through the state board, and the process they use is really pretty amazing because they bring together experts teachers from the classroom, curriculum coordinators, the folks that are working in the trenches, and sometimes other folks, professors, that are also thinking about these different content areas as they apply to student learning. And so they're asking those questions. What do we expect our children to know, and how will we know that they've achieved mastery of that sort of knowledge? And so that process allows us to consider best practice. It allows us to consider the innovations of education, allows us to establish Wyoming standards for high expectations of student performance. And then through that process, the Standards Committee makes a recommendation to the State Board of Education, and the State Board of Education has sort of like a hearing on that, where stakeholders are able to sort of share their thoughts on these proposed standards, and then they vet it. And then after they are done with it, they send it on to the governor for the governor's signature and the governor's approval. And it has the same administrative procedure that you have for the promulgation of any rule in the state of Wyoming. That allows stakeholder voice in the process, and that's a really good thing that I think we want to continue to preserve. Then we get to that local level, and at the local level, they develop the curriculum. The curriculum is, how are we going to teach this? We know what we want our kids to know. How are we at the local level going to teach this to our students? And curriculum is across grade bands, and curriculum is has to be both vertically and horizontally aligned so that we're ensuring our student knowledge. And then, of course, there's the assessment of that. And so those are the pieces that make the Wyoming system work. And I think our questions and our discussion really ought to be, so what's the problem in that bin, and how do we get better? I really appreciated the testimony of the State Board of Education today, because they talked about sort of a concern that they had heard from Wyoming, and certainly this committee has heard it historically over the years. There's getting to be a lot on the plate. How do we reduce what's on the plate for our teachers so that they can really teach it? And at one point, you just looked at a long list of standards and said that there is no possible way within the hours provided in a school year to teach everything that we say we expect our kids to know. So what happened, we had picking and choosing. Districts said, we're going to prioritize this, or we're going to prioritize that. And then that puts us in danger of not having the uniform educational system that the Campbell case has called for. So very wisely, the State Board of Education said, let's prioritize this. Let's cut back. Let's get real clear about what our common expectations of what we expect kids to know and be able to do is. And they cut back by 60 to 65, 70%. My goodness, if you take one out of every 3 standards and say that's the only one you get to keep, that's some serious prioritization. That's some real deep thinking about what is most important. I guarantee you, if you asked me to do social studies standards, which happens to be my favorite in that list of Common Core of knowledge, I'd give you a huge long list that nobody would want to have. If you asked a math expert or a language arts expert, their areas they would go. So I do think the questions come back to Senator Rothfuss's question of, how do we ensure we don't see that bloat again? How do we make sure that when we're asking the state board for what do we expect our kids to know and to be able to do, that we have a reasonable amount? And I do think that that's where a good direction of this committee could possibly go. I would say along that area, to start focusing it in, 29.1-101B2 is where we talk about focusing on math and reading and writing in grades kindergarten through 8. So it has a very vague statement that says that they shall be foundational, or they'll be the focus area. But we don't really have real clarity. What does that mean? What do we expect for the focus to be? I believe that the last speakers talked about one possible way of going there, and that's to talk within a grade band. Are there areas that you want to have focus in? So if the board wanted to focus and look at what's currently done, we've seen great work done. I think it would be important to go back to the Chapter 7 rules, which is where the state board has established the content and performance standards for different grade bands and to say, what is it that we're doing now? Where are our recommendations right now? And are there areas that we want to create a greater clarity for emphasis? Are we going to say within the grade band of kindergarten through second grade that we want to narrow that focus? We want to have greater specificity, that we're going to focus on language, reading, writing, and mathematics in those grade levels, and then in the grade band of 3-5 to add things to it? Certainly an approach that we could do to add that specificity. It is also in the direction that the legislature gives to the state board. So if you gave the state board clearer direction that said, state board, when you promulgate standards, they must be manageable. Some sort of direction like that could also be something that helps to direct this so that in future, the state board doesn't have that tendency to go to the bloat, to add extra stuff. You tell them, state board, when you're doing this, you're going to have to prioritize. You're going to have to manage it. One thing that we also will want to be careful about and think about in the last line of questioning, Senator Scott talked about prohibition of certain things within certain grade bands. Historically, the standards have been a floor. This is what we expect the district to do. But if the district wants to go beyond that, the district had the capacity to go beyond that. But this is the uniform education to be offered by the state. And so if we do go into a road of prohibition, then that will change sort of expectations around, can a district accelerate? Can a district go beyond that? What happens if we have that high performing second grader who's ready to read at or ready to take on additional content maybe at a certain level? So I think I appreciate the discussion today. I do think it has helped to bring a focus to this. I'm not sure and don't think that this current legislation really gets us there. But I do think that there are possibilities for this committee to have some more focus around what is our expectation of the state board in the promulgation of standards. Is there further direction that you wish to give to the state board as they consider standards? And as that work goes forward, certainly appreciate the process of work groups that include stakeholders and allow for lots of voices in that. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. Appreciate that and commend the discussion that's happened so far today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Scott, I'm sensing that you have a question.
Hey, I'm hearing you say that, yes, we need to differentiate standards somewhat. As I've been listening to the witnesses, Mr. Chairman, I'm developing the theory that there are certain things that we have to require of everybody because they are foundational to the ability to do further academic work. And further academic work can broaden out into a very wide spectrum, Mr. Chairman, of topics. But certain things are foundational. The basic reading ability, basic math abilities, which both of these bills reaches to, the basic science stuff in the further grade bands. Is that a useful way to look at this? And should we either differentiate the standards that are set outside of that, say these are less important than those foundational ones, or should we forbid them? How should we handle, is that a useful distinction, and how should we handle it?
Mr. Chairman, I think that that's a good discussion to have. And I do think that there is some usefulness in prioritizing the expectations of what we want our kids to know and to be able to do. I'm a little reluctant to say that the Common Core of Knowledge needs to be a list that says math functions, different types of math processes as opposed to mathematics. I think one of the things that I personally have seen is I look at what the expectation of, say, a kindergartner or a first grader is today versus where we have seen that 10, 15 years ago. I happen to have a grandson who will be starting second grade this year. And so looking at his educational journey and the difference of that versus my own children versus my own education. And I think we have said that we increase our expectations. We have had higher expectations. And so by keeping it broad, I think we allow for the discussion by the educational professionals to say what is appropriate for a third grader today, what is appropriate for a second grader today. So I think that having that discussion is important. I think it is good. I think that the broad direction from the legislature is the most helpful. And perhaps if you want to, the focus from the legislature is most helpful. But allowing the standards process as we have it today, the discussion by the educational professionals to say, okay, what does the expectation for mathematics for a second grader look like? What will Uriah, my grandson, need to learn in second grade this year so that he is best prepared to be a successful third grader next year? I think that that's wonderful, and I'm certainly impressed, and I'm happy to see that they have made those expectations relevant to the students today. Because if I look at what I did in second grade versus what my grandson does in second grade, he is better prepared for the world than I ever was.
Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Mr. Stoltz.
Good morning. Scott Stoltz, Executive Director of Wyoming Association of School Administrators. Thank you for the opportunity to visit with you this morning. The first thing I want to do is to share my appreciation for the conversations that you have chosen to have, because it's focused on one thing. How do we improve the quality of education in our state? And that is absolutely the highest priority that we can place on K-12 education. How can we be better, and how can we more adequately and successfully achieve the success of our students? So these conversations are very appreciated, and I appreciate this impetus. I was actually on the working committee, so I appreciate Representative Andrew for facilitating this conversation. And I did start in the testimony and the conversations that we had, help me understand why. Why are we choosing to go into the realm of legislating specifically this content? And what are we trying to solve? And the answer was simple, as it was stated in the beginning of the conversation. There is too much of expectations that we have on our K-5 elementary teachers. They don't have enough time in the day to teach everything that is expected. And that's understood. As I draw upon my experience as an elementary teacher, a junior high teacher, a elementary principal and secondary principal, as well as the superintendent, there is some extreme focus on that. How do we find enough hours in the day to focus on all of the standards that we're expected to teach? Reading, writing, and math is core and is essential. And that without that, they can't be successful in any other cores that they choose to pursue. So how do we make time? It's difficult. It's very difficult. So is legislation the way that we mandate and ensure that this happens? We already have a process in place. It's the State Board of Education that you work intricately with to ensure that we are focused on the right work, that we're using standards that we feel are essential. Is it, as a testimony earlier, that we remove everything except reading, writing, and math from K-5 elementary school? I think that's swinging the pendulum too far. Is there a way to potentially reduce the number of standards? For example, in kindergarten, there are 4 standards in science. In first grade, there are 4 standards in science. In second grade, there are 5 standards in science. The expectation is that teachers have to teach those standards. Now, do they teach them in isolation? No. They find a way to embed them within reading, writing, and math to ensure that they are covering them. But covering is probably the right word. It's not necessarily teaching them. Do we then remove humanities? Do we remove art, music, and PE at the elementary level? I believe no. I think those are essential and are important for our students to have the opportunity to be exposed to reading, writing, and math, along with the fine arts, along with social studies, science, and our fine arts, PE, and health. Those are important for our kids to have exposure to. But can we reduce the standards so that the focus can be more primarily on reading, writing, and math? I believe yes. Grade bands right now are being done in the areas of CT&E is K5, health is K2, PE is K2, world language is K2, computer science is K2, whereas science is individual by grade level. So I think having those conversations with the respective state board and they in turn with those practitioners, I think is critically important to the success of how we're able to deliver the quality of education for our students. I think that's the means to go about doing that. Senator Scott asked a question, what do we do if kids are not getting that? It boils down to the basic premise of the professional learning community framework. There are 4 essential questions, which is, first one, what do we expect all kids to know and be able to do? Those are our standards. The state has provided us guidelines as school districts of what we are to teach. But the responsibility of the district then is to sit down as a grade level group and across the vertical articulation is looking at the standards and making them more specific. They're generally written for a reason, to allow the autonomy of school districts to deliver that quality of instruction to meet the needs of their kids. Not to be so specific that you're listing exactly what has to be taught, but you're giving a guide and a framework. Those standards then are boiled down to what do we expect all kids to know and be able to do? And the second question is, how do we know if they did it or not? That is done then by assessments. It's not waiting until the end of the semester. It's not waiting until the end of the 9 weeks. And heaven forbid, it's not waiting until the end of the year or looking at YTOP to go, did we get it or not? No. Common formative assessments are done 2 to 3 weeks to find out if they got it. And then what do we do? Question 3, kid didn't get it. What do we do now? We don't ignore it and say we taught it, they didn't get it, so now we're moving on. It's rather, how do we intervene? That's the critical question. What are we doing next to ensure that they are getting it? And what if they already are getting it? How do we enrich that opportunity? That's what school districts are doing. They're using these guides to help provide the clarity as far as the vision. The districts then are providing the specificity to meet the needs of their students through the process and ensuring that they're getting it. And then they're reflecting and refining their practice each and every year to make the necessary changes to ensure that the success is happening. That's the responsibility of districts. Certainly providing this focus and the intentional work to move forward to ensure that we are doing the right work, critically important. These are the right conversations. We have a means to go about doing that. Certainly with working with the state board, and then they in turn working with local school districts and practitioners is absolutely an essential way to go about doing that. And then assigning a percentage, and we've talked about that. I think that's going down a slippery slope. When you start specifically prescribing a percentage of time spent on a specific area of content, again, it ends up being a compliance issue. You look at that through accreditation, you provide a schedule of what teachers are technically teaching. We know that that differs. We allow autonomy of teachers, especially at the elementary level, that if you need to spend more time in that area in reading, you're going to do it on that day. You're not going to say, I didn't spend 70% of my day on that. Now I have to stop because the clock just ticked and now I have to move on to the next content area. We need to allow the autonomy. Yes, the majority of the focus needs to be on reading, writing, and math, but allow the autonomy of districts to make that decision on how it looks and looking at data to help drive those decisions. So with that, I will certainly stand for any questions. I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Coach Rowan, Julie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Mr. Stoltz, do you think we're headed in the right direction, I guess, with, we're trying to reduce standards? And I think, like I said, I think the state board does a great job. Do we need to keep going down that path? Not only with, I know we're focusing on the K through 5, but what about the rest of the crew?
Chair Andrew and Senator Schuler, I think certainly the state board is doing an admirable job of reflecting on exactly that. What is essential? And I think those continued conversations are absolutely needed. We know when we talk right now specifically about K5, our elementary teachers specifically are all about making sure that they're expected to do it, they're going to do it. So if we then have those standards, then they're going to find a way to make sure that they're teaching them. But if we reduce those standards, then they know that they have the authority, if you will, to be able to spend more of a concerted focus time on the reading, writing, and math areas where they know it is even more essential than some of the other content areas.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. We'll now close public comment. And we are at committee directives. Committee, any thoughts on the direction of this bill? I guess initially from myself, I would wonder if there's interest in taking what we've heard today and establishing another working group to try to narrow this down to what seems to be the things that we agree on and see where we can go from there. Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I guess I think that's a better direction than proceeding with the bill, but I guess I'd ask what that might be. I mean, the sense that I got really is that a few years ago, we asked the State Board of Education to take a serious look at this based on the feedback, the same feedback that we're hearing now. A process between the state board, the department, stakeholders, districts began in earnest. And I think it's getting to the point now where those standards have been cut down. So I feel like the process is actually working, which is kind of cool to see. It's nice when you have a process and then you can look at it and it works. What would we be looking for in legislation? I'm left thinking that I'd rather see this process continue that we have underway right now and see if it's meeting resistance or failing to achieve objectives because we have something statutorily that is in conflict with the best practice. So what might we do if we have another draft of this legislation?
Thank you. I agree that, the Board of Education is really working towards this goal. I think the part that I see that is missing is, the legislature giving our input in directing this work and really setting the expectations of the standards that are to be drafted. I don't want to get involved in writing these standards, but I think having more clear direction of what is the education that the legislature expects students to have is a worthy goal. I think it's something that we are supposed to do in combination with recalibration, which we don't, have time to get to that process within a recalibration committee. I think starting to work on it this far ahead of the next recalibration is where this belongs. And so what I would suggest looking at if we go back to work on this is looking at the grade bands. I mean, I think kind of combining the testimony of Mary Schmidt and Brian Farmer, I think there is possibly an opportunity to define what's in those grade bands at a high level to direct what the legislature expects, and possibly even some of the concept that Senator Scott is talking about is require exactly which subjects we are writing standards on and which ones we are not and we are leaving to local control. I think there's some opportunity there. So I don't want to do anything at all to dismantle any of the work that the board has done. But I think actually more clear direction on what they are doing going forward may be helpful. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I think this bill is perhaps one of the more important ones we've had in quite some time. And I think we're starting to head down a road that is going to be productive. what I'm starting to see is that we need to distinguish between those things that are essential for further learning, such as the reading, writing in the earliest grade bands, and the mathematics in the earliest grade bands, and adding the science to it in the 3 to 5 grade band. I think those are essential things that every student in the state needs in order to be able to take advantage of the vast opportunity there is for further learning on different subjects, where I think we can give a lot of flexibility because there's way more that's available and is useful than school districts can ever teach. They need to select in those areas. And I think we need to think about, okay, how do we make sure that the standards are met? Those standards that are key are met by the individual students. I think the 70% was an attempt at that. I think it's a mistake to do it that way. That's trying to do it by saying, this is your input. I'd much rather tell the districts to come up with a system to evaluate, have individual students learn those things, and what do we do about them when they haven't, and give that as a general instruction to the school districts. So I think working this bill, Mr. Chairman, I think we've got a vehicle we can turn into a very good product we can bring forward to the legislature.
All right, thank you. Further discussion? Seeing none, I suppose I would like perhaps just a vote of the committee on whether we do or do not bring this into another working group. It's a pretty big project. And so if the direction we have put out there is something we want to continue working on, I want to see if that is something that the committee wants to continue putting effort into. Senator Scott.
Chairman, I would think we could take this draft and amend it as a committee right in the next hour or two, and send it back for further redraft that we could then amend again at the next meeting. I think it's at the stage where we could do that. I'm prepared to offer some amendments if you want, but that's one way to proceed, as opposed to another working group at this point. I think time for the full committee to start taking a hand in it.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Based on the conversation we had today, I don't think we need to proceed with this bill. I just disagree with this being something that's of benefit to the committee and to the education community in the state. I definitely don't think we could get it into shape today. I think if there is a desire to keep working this, then it needs to be a committee. I think that's absolutely essential, that we would continue a working group and bring stakeholders in and rework it consistent with some of the suggestions that you laid out a few minutes ago. But even along that path, again, I just am not seeing that the system is broken and that the state will be better off with us being the ones that fix it, candidly. I think right now, the decisions are being made by experts based on data. And we've pushed it so that the politics side, what's in statute right now, are very high level. The further we move down into providing what I guess we would call clarification, but more detail in statute, is when we start getting into space where it really isn't appropriate in my mind for policy or politics. It's appropriate for expertise, data, and stakeholders through the state board's process to be drawn in and fight that out. So I'm just really struggling to see where we add value through more statute in this process relative to what's being done right now in the testimony that I've heard today. And so from my perspective, this is one I'd push pause on overall for this interim, and then see if we get any more requests for changes from the stakeholder community, again, based on things that they can't get done.
All right. Well, with that, I guess I would just like to take the temperature of the committee and see whether or not we do continue to move forward with this. So I guess I move to establish another working group on this bill and would just like to officially do a show of hands on whether or not we do that.
That motion.
It's a motion.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if we need a second for that first, but I have some thoughts on this motion.
Please go
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with my compatriot from over the hill. I think we need to work on this in a working group. I don't think this is ready for today, and so if we were to continue with this idea, it may merit more conversation, but we should see if there are like volunteers for this working group. And I would prefer to approach it that way.
Further discussion on the motion? Representative Yugamas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do think that a working group would be warranted. Is there any kind of specificity that we could add? Because I know the other stakeholders will be a part of this working group, I'm sure. And I just want to make sure that the defined goal is specified, especially from my opinion, K through 12, reading, writing, math, period. And really just focusing on those things. If we could do that, that way we don't have another instance where we're complicatedly trying to simplify something.
Well said.
Yes, I mean, the goal, I think, would be what I stated earlier. I mean, I think we did move it to K through 5. I would kind of like to stick with that. But essentially defining and prioritizing what is essential with the goal of creating simplicity and providing direction to the board of what the legislature expects in those grades for them to create the standards and not necessarily have a bill that is standards. Further discussion? Representative Strzok.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just wondering about keeping it really working on the that statute, the 21-9-101, and keeping it really defining by the grade band, you know, and just, you know, really working on that. And then I guess I was kind of wondering why you already had the working group, why we weren't kind of sticking with a lot of the same on that, where they've got it going, and or were we changing up the whole working group? I guess I didn't know.
I imagine many of the same people would be involved in the working group, but if we are going to continue the working group, I would definitely hope that some more legislators would join. And we could, you know, bring something to the next meeting that a lot more people have been involved in.
But then just really working on that statute there.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion? All right. All those in favor of the motion to establish the second or continuing working group, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no.
No.
All those in favor, raise your hand. And is there anyone online? All those opposed? Okay, 6 in favor, 5 against.
Mr. Chairman, I believe Senator Brennan had her hand up for a no. Senator Brennan, can you confirm?
Oh, okay. Oh, no, I guess she could.
That is correct. That was a no.
For no, okay. Okay. The motion does not carry. No, she wasn't up there. All right. All right. We will now move on to the K through 12 physical education requirements bill.
Mr.
afternoon.
Chairman, members of the committee, Tanya Heitrick, Legislative Service Office. And I have with me Ashley Phillips. She's the operations paralegal and legislative editor. Recall that this bill draft was prepared at the request of your last meeting. Oh, 1 second. And it included 2 policy choices, establish minimum instruction time model policies, as well as a policy prohibiting removal from PE for disciplinary reasons, unless, the disciplinary action is related to action within that class. The committee discussed putting this into a session law, but upon further consideration, LSO determined that it's better suited to stick in the green books and have a statutory reference where school districts and other people can go to see exactly what that continuing obligation is. And with that, I will turn walking the bill over to Ms. Phillips.
Mr. Chairman, Ashley Phillips, legislative editor at the Legislative Service Office, as Tanya mentioned. I'm going to take you through 27 LSO 130 K-12 physical education requirements, working draft 5. The substance of the bill begins on page 1, line 13. And that first section, page 1, line 13 through page 2, line 9. Amends 21-304B, which are the duties of the State Board of Education. And it just adds another paragraph requiring them to adopt a model policy that school districts may utilize. It does not require them to adopt that same policy, establishing minimum instructional time requirements for the student participating in PE courses. The second amendment that comes with this bill goes to the second policy decision, page 2, lines 11 through 20, which amends 21-3-110A. Those are the duties of the school boards, school district boards of trustees, adding a new paragraph requiring those school boards to adopt a policy prohibiting removing those students from a PE class for disciplinary action that occurs in other classes or other times of day. There is that specific carve out except for when it is related to a student's conduct in that PE class. You will note that this bill has an immediate effective date, which would allow the state board and those school districts to begin work on drafting these policies immediately. And we'll stand for any questions.
Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. And where did my agenda go? Just make sure. All right, we'll now move on to public testimony. Is there any testimony on this bill? Just one? Anybody else in the room? Just 3 chairs. Please. All right.
And Mr. Chairman, just to give you a heads up, there is one online.
All right, thank you. Mr. Christensen.
Chairman Andrew, thank you. Chase Christensen, again, Wyoming Association of Secondary School Principals. I just wanted to point out, this bill is in contradiction to one that you're going to take a look at this afternoon with student discipline. The student discipline bill gives express permission to teachers, other school employees to do removals and prescribes a process by which students would be able to move back into a class from that point. This one says you cannot be removed from that PE class. There would be some discipline measures that would be taken under consideration, et cetera, where a student may not be back in to the education realm for that PE class by the time PE class came around. So there's going to be removals that occur under the school discipline bill that would conflict with the law as written. I would ask you to contemplate that. Additionally, as written, thinking toward this, and this is hyperbolic, but it's just to demonstrate where this could go. A district could get into a position where a student did something in a disciplinary realm so severe that they're under consideration for expulsion and suspended from school at the time, but we've got to let them come back in to go to their PE class because we can't remove them from PE class for behavior that occurred anywhere else. This is very tight, and I think it's appropriate. We need to be having kids in PE. That's a great thing but as it's written, there are some issues with regard to both the school discipline bill as well as students that probably ought to be removed for the whole day. We want them removed for the whole day, not all but PE. I'll stand for questions.
Are there any questions? Senator Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Christensen, I'm gathering you don't have a problem with the concept. It's just that it's not drafted quite the way, so it ends up with a conflict with the other bill. Is that accurate? That we don't want to be using, you can't go to PE because you didn't do your homework last night, so you're in trouble, and so you don't get to go to PE. Is more the objective, and you're only concerned about the conflict that arises with those more serious circumstances. Is that fair?
Chairman Andrew, Senator Office, yes, I agree, and I think it would be broadly agreed upon that the spirit is good. Drafting just needs to be worked upon.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Co-Chairwoman Schuler.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I kind of think the same thing. The bill itself is short and sweet and to the point, but I think we could add some language that would maybe make it so it doesn't conflict with the one upcoming if we take that under consideration. And I think it's just some verbiage. Because I think we could, I can think of some things we could put in there, even on page 2, where we just talk about excessive disciplinary purposes, or you could even put violent, whatever, you could put the verbiage, whatever you needed. But I think, the point that Senator Rothfuss is making, and I would agree with, is that, that's sometimes what teachers do. Sometimes administrators do, because they feel like, well, that's an area that, they're not going to be missing out on their math class or their English class, but so what if it's PE? But yet PE is really, really, really important, especially for these little ones, to be able to do better in math and English and so on. So do you feel like maybe if we just added some different verbiage, we get where we needed to go with that? Or do you have some thoughts on what you would suggest there? Or just work it over?
Please go ahead.
I think sorry, Chairman Andrew, I think that LSO with comments made, plus in the spirit of where you're wanting the bill to go, has probably got it figured out already.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Senator Scott.
My instinct is that we're trying to micromanage here. Do we really need any legislation at all in this area?
Chairman Andrew, Senator Scott, I asked the same question of 6 of the bills that were drafted for today's meeting. That being all of them. I don't know where the problem exists that we're trying to solve, but that clearly stems from not seeing the entire picture, because nobody would have written legislation if there wasn't a problem to solve, certainly. So I don't know that I'm the appropriate one to answer that question. I think that we've got most of these realms taken care of pretty well without the drafted legislation.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Chalk.
Good afternoon, Chairman Andrews and the committee. I'm always stunned, Senator Scott, when I sit there and agree with you, and I've done it 3 or 4 times this morning. So thank you. Little humor, right? But anyway, so my concern around PE, I think it's a narrow scope in the language. When it says you can't take them from PE, I think if they're an ISS, ISD, we need to provide a physical outlet if needed, but it's not that PE class because they've been removed for a reason. So I know that in my instance, when we have kids in ISS, when everybody else is in class, we take them for a walk or we take them to the gym. We give them that physical outlet because I think that's what the intent is to make sure those kids have the movement they need. So again, I don't think it needs to be a bill. I don't think it needs to come forward. But if we're going to move forward, I think we should not narrow the scope to PE because you know the way around that? It's not ISS anymore, it's OSS, just so you know. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, Ms. Heydrich.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I could speak to the drafting. When LSO drafts a bill, we don't draft it in contemplation of other legislation that may or may not pass. And so I think it's important for the committee to consider. I understand the policy choice there, and perhaps there's a conflict in the policy choices, but I would encourage you to look at each bill sort of separately because there's no way to anticipate what bill is going to pass and what bill isn't going to pass and what amendments may happen and what amendments may not happen. And with regard to the substance for the instance of removing a student for in-school suspension or some larger disciplinary measure, we can certainly modify that language. You know, I can probably come up with something over lunch if that's appropriate.
Good, thank you. Further public testimony? Seeing none?
Mr. Chairman, are you prepared to go online?
Yes, we'll go online. Thank you.
I am bringing Ben Kern into the room.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Great, thank you. Members of the Joint Education Committee, thank you for the opportunity to comment on this draft bill. Again, my name is Ben Kern. I'm here as a citizen of Wyoming and representing the Wyoming Association of Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance, also a faculty member at the University of Wyoming. At your last meeting, there was discussion to consider minimum instructional time requirements for physical education and stronger protections for student access. I appreciate the response to this point. And I think the current bill takes two important steps, directing the state board to develop this model policy for instructional time and two, requiring the districts to prohibit removing students from physical education, except when the discipline's related to something that happens in the physical education course. I strongly support these provisions and I encourage you to strengthen them in three specific ways. First, I think the state board model policy should also address not only how much physical education students receive, but it should provide for protections for students' access to that instruction. Physical education is explicitly included in Wyoming's Common Core of Knowledge and Wyoming's physical education content and performance standards. It defines what students are expected to know and be able to do across those grade bands. Those standards include movement skills, fitness, personal and social behavior. And it's important to realize that physical education is not simply time spent being active. It's an academic content area with specific learning expectations. And that distinction is critical when we consider things like being able to waive or make students exempt from or provide substitutions for or even online physical education. Things like marching band, junior ROTC, and school sports can be very valuable and physically active, but they have different purposes and cannot automatically be assumed to be providing the same instruction as physical education. And these are often offered up as substitutions for physical education, or students are allowed to be exempt or waive that requirement. A substitution should be a true educational equivalent, not simply just another activity where students happen to be moving. Wyoming standards expect students to develop their knowledge and skills across multiple domains, including movement competency, fitness skills, personal and social behavior. I think the model policy should therefore require reasonable and judicious use of waivers, exemptions, and substitutions so that they don't become mechanisms for bypassing standards-based physical education. This does currently happen in Wyoming and states across the country. My work and my research lab have uncovered this in every single state, and it is a prominent thing that happens. I can direct you to the school health map. If you Google that, you can come up with a space where you can look specifically at Wyoming data and compare it to other states. And it is a problem across all states, and it's a way that physical education is being removed from students, despite there being in some cases rules for requiring them to be in physical education. So again, secondly, I strongly encourage the committee to expand the provision on removal from physical education so students can also not be pulled from physical education to complete academic work in another area or receive remediation or additional instruction in some other way. I feel like, and many in my organization and in my field feel as though, removing a student from physical education to address something like mathematics or reading or science or another subject area inappropriately sacrifices learning in one area to support another. And if you think about it, we wouldn't routinely remove a student from mathematics so they could make up work in English, for example. It makes little sense to remedy a learning need in one area and then create a loss in another. So there's also an academic reason to protect physical activity that occurs through physical education. Research shows that school day physical activity can improve concentration and on-task behavior and can support cognitive functioning and academic performance. Essentially, the broader evidence also supports positive relationships among physical activity, fitness, cognition, and academic achievement. These benefits matter immediately and as well as over time. Third, I encourage the committee to extend the protection that's being offered in the bill around physical education, to extend that to recess as well by prohibiting withholding recess as a disciplinary consequence. This actually happens more often in public schools across the country, including Wyoming, than does withholding physical education. Both are inappropriate. Withholding, valuable instructional time and physical activity time from students, as a disciplinary behavior, is not appropriate. Recess is a health enhancing opportunity where kids can get physical activity. It should not become behavioral currency. Taking recess away as a punishment removes something that supports their health and readiness to learn without directly teaching the behavior we want the student to demonstrate instead. National school health recommendations are consistent in that schools not withhold opportunities for physical activity as punishment. Physical activity can also help students return to their academic work, be more attentive and on task. So if the goal of discipline is to improve behavior and improve learning, removing an opportunity that supports that is really counterproductive. So the guiding principle behind all these recommendations is simple. If Wyoming establishes what students should learn, a la the standards in physical education, and how much instructional time they should receive, that state policy should also protect students' opportunity to actually receive that instruction. At the same time, schools should avoid withholding opportunities for physical activity that support students' health and cognitive function, readiness to learn, and academic performance. Physical education and school day physical activity should be treated as contributors to student learning and well-being, not as expendable time that can be removed to address academic or behavioral concerns. So I'll leave it at that for questioning, and if there's any comments that you'd like me to provide. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. With that, we'll conclude public testimony. Committee, is there any discussion on the bill? Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. After testimony, I think the model policy concept is one that makes a lot of sense and is straightforward and easy. And I think it provides districts with guidance on the importance of what we just heard in that public testimony. The actual mandate of getting to the point where we're excluding a use, I think that gets us into a more challenging space statutorily for a simple little bill. I feel like we could incorporate the concept that we were trying to capture from the mandate into the model policy aspect so that it all just becomes a model policy and we delete that second piece straightforward. And I have some language that I just put together to do that. That would be my inclination, kind of based on where we're at, is to work the bill and then combine those two into just adopt model policies that are best uses of physical education and recess time.
Chairwoman Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Senator Rothfuss and I are exactly on the same idea because I was trying to come up with some language and I think he's hit the nail on the head. I think we can do that by going forward with the model language in XV, III, and then whatever else you were going to add. I can just scratch mine out, but I think we're all on the same page. At least C and I are on that.
Further discussion? We have a motion.
That being the case, Mr. Chairman, I'll move the bill.
I'll second it.
Moved and seconded. Amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I'll propose an amendment on obviously page 2. We'll start by amending on the B paragraph, Romanet 18, adding to the end of line 9. So leave the language intact. And then it'll say participation in physical education courses. Delete the period and add and protections for student access to physical education and physical activity, including provisions governing the reasonable and judicious use of waivers, exemptions, substitutions, and online physical education, and disciplinary consequences that affect student participation in physical education or physical activity, including recess. I can read that one more time and then I'll send it to staff. So it's and protections for student access to physical education and physical activity, including provisions governing the reasonable and judicious use of waivers, exemptions, substitutions, and online physical education, and disciplinary consequences that affect student participation in physical education or physical activity, including recess. So that captures all the concepts we heard in the last testimony, but puts it all into the model policy instead of thou shalt not. And then the second part of my amendment would be to strike all new language on line 16 through 20. So we're basically wiping out that portion of it. That's my motion, Mr. Chairman.
Do we have a second?
Second it.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. And question for Senator Rothfuss. Would that language on line 2 or page 2, line 7, would that may need to be a shall?
Senator Rothfuss.
Mr. Chairman, may utilize, I still think is probably appropriate if this is model language, that we're providing good model language. So they have to produce the, let's see, wait. Oh, this is the state board. Adopt a model policy that school district, no, may utilize. So they shall adopt a model policy. So they definitely do the model policy, but districts don't have to adopt that model policy. So that's a may, and that's intentional. So it provides guidance to the districts, but the districts don't have to adopt it. If we pass the bill as written, it leaves local control. And I think that, again, is not going to get us 100% to the end zone for some of the interests that are here, but provides clear guidance. And I think clear guidance at this point is a good first step. rather than going the whole way and telling all the districts exactly what to do with physical education. So yeah, the may is what I think it needs to be.
Mr. Chairman, understood. Thank you.
Representative Lawley. Oh, sorry, I thought you had a comment. Further discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The amendment has been adopted. And with that, do we review, are we voting on the bill, or are we seeing it with the amendment in the next meeting?
I think that's voting on the bill, unless anyone wants this. We can certainly.
That's the motion. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think if anybody wants to, I don't think there's any problem waiting, but it's a simple enough change. If everybody understands it, we can just vote on the bill now. But I defer. I don't want anyone to feel like they don't understand what the bill is before they vote.
All right, are we, we're calling the roll on this one? All right, Senator Scott.
You want to take a vote on the bill as it stands at this point? Mr. Chairman, on and against the bill, I would hope we would defeat the motion as the bill stands right now. I do think that this is unnecessary micromanagement of the school districts, and I think they can develop reasonable policies in this. And I think for some kids, maybe the threat of removing the PT might be an effective discipline, because that may be important to those kids. I think that'd be best left up to local management decisions. And I do think that not all realms of learning are equal. This one, I think you can remove the kids from something they really enjoy for a while as an effective way of disciplining them. Because it's a discipline that may work. And, and missing a little PE is not the same as not being able to read.
Further discussion? Senator Office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. In responding to Senator Scott, his concerns are the reason why the may remains. That's the intent of it, is a recognition that this isn't an area where I think we should be preempting school districts. But the gentleman that testified has been looking at this, and I've had an opportunity, and so did Senator Schuler, to meet with him and understand. This has become a problem because it's sort of an easy thing for districts to do, to take up time. All right, let's take a little time away from recess. Let's take a little time away from PE. That's how we can make up some of the extra time we need to teach other things. And so physical education opportunities have declined during the school day over the years, and that ends up being a bad thing for kids. Rather than coming with a heavy hand of mandate, thou shalt have 57 minutes a day for physical education, the conversation we had was this idea of, all right, well, let's just try and get a good data and science-based model policy where the State Board of Education works through it and says, this is what you should be doing. This is the right answer for a healthy student's physical education experience, and making sure all of the districts understand that that's important without a mandate. And so that's all this bill is doing. This is not a heavy hand of government. This is you really should be considering this, folks. Please do if you haven't already. And that's a great starting point, I think. So the bill is cognizant of Senator Scott's concerns of going too far and telling districts what to do, but it uses the resources we have of the State Board of Education being able to bring together stakeholders and experts and putting together a great policy that districts probably should be looking at and utilizing to the best of their ability. So I take the senator's concerns, and I think we've addressed them.
Thank you. Co-Chairwoman Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, Senator Office are right. We're on the same wavelength today with everything. I'm kind of like, we don't always agree on things, but all we've got to do is look around in our communities. We have kids that are really, overweight, out of shape, not very healthy. I can't tell you how many kids the last couple of years that I taught that we were dealing with diabetes. You know, high schoolers, they're 14, 15 years old. They're not getting enough, obviously, and sometimes they're not going to get it at home. We know they're not eating right quite often as well. But kids do better. They learn better when they've had some conditioning. Their heart works better. They get a little more oxygen to the brain. When they're fed, they do better. I mean, all these things, you know, obviously reading is probably one of the most important things that our kids are going to be able to do and come out of our education system with. But if we're not healthy, some of these kids are dropping out because they're so unhealthy. And quite often, some of them, I actually have someone in the family, extended family, that is having some health issues, and that's part of the problem. They're maybe going to have to homeschool because of that. And so I think we're kind of trying to just nip it in the bud without heavy handing this from the legislative side. And I think leaving the May in is exactly what we need to do. It's a model policy. That's really all it is. And I think, and it still leaves the districts, you know, they can still do what they'd like, but let's just don't continually take away recess, take away, you know, PE for this. Well, it's just PE. I used to get so tired of that because I taught in the classroom and I taught in the gym, both. And they both are as important as anything else we do. Is let's give our kids a chance to be healthy, because without their health, they're going to be falling asleep in class or having to run to the school nurse to get their diabetes figured out, whatever. So I just think this bill is a good step in the right direction. And I think it's something that we really got to take a look at, because if you walk into any school, you're going to see a lot of kids that are really already struggling at the elementary, middle school level, let alone high school. Their BMIs are out of control. So I think this bill gets us where we need to go. Thank you.
Representative Strzok. Representative Lawley, I'm sorry, it came from the same direction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree. I can vote for this bill because of the amendment. I was concerned about the language that was prescriptive for districts. And also, the school districts in my district are smaller, and model policies are very helpful for them. And again, I'm glad it's a may, not a shall, adopt it, but I think it helps provide guidance as those issues are seen in that district. So I support it as it is with the amendment. Without the amendment, actually, I was not going to be able to support the bill. So thank you.
Further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, this is a vote for sponsorship of 27 LSO 130 K-12 physical education requirements as amended. Senator Brennan?
Aye.
Senator Olson?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss? Senator Scott? Representative Bratton?
Aye.
Representative Erickson?
Aye.
Representative Guggenmoss?
No.
Representative Kelly?
No.
Representative Lawley?
Aye.
Representative Singh?
No.
Representative Strzok?
No.
Representative Williams?
Aye.
Co-Chairwoman Schuler? Chairman Andrew?
Aye.
That is 9 aye, 5 no.
The bill is passed the committee, and exactly on the dot as I planned at 12:30, we will have lunch. Then we'll be back at 2 p.m.